There aren't many mutually agreed upon opinions in the gaming universe nowadays, but I do think there is one that comes pretty close. Call of Duty games just aren't as good as they used to be. We hear it a lot, or some form of it, but it rarely comes with much more analysis than that. The thing is, oftentimes people agree with the sentiment, but disagree with the timeline. Maybe you thought COD 2 was the zenith of its attention to historical accuracy and commitment to adhering to the literal Call of Duty. I think many people think it was somewhere between COD 4 and Modern Warfare 3, when the after-school multiplayer Xbox Live parties were at their most fun and their most competitive. Finally, there's a core of people that find the final nail in the coffin was the advanced movement and further progression into the future that did the series in. Regardless, the games are still routinely the best-selling video games of each year. They are absolute entertainment institutions at this point, and while they have traversed hundreds of years in terms of their settings, one can still tell a Call of Duty game is a Call of Duty game within seconds upon seeing it, even the newer ones. There's a through line of ubiquitous and consistent design decisions that have created an absolute identity for what it means to be a COD game. Are we tired of that design? Has it been played out, or has the industry moved on? How did this series go from the military-focused valor of a collection of normal men and women to the superhero action of individuals doing superhuman things? It is no doubt that the Call of Duty games have shared design ubiquity throughout each title, but it is not at all true that they are all the same game in their thematic and tonal objectives. Call of Duty the First and Call of Duty, say, Modern Warfare 3 even, are so radically different in their approach that it's hilarious to think of all of these games as being wholesale derivative. When was the shift, though? Did it happen at once or over time? And it goes without saying that this is an extremely complicated question, one that requires a video of this length to even attempt to answer. Because I've always found Call of Duty to be one of the most interesting video game franchises ever, simply from a consumer standpoint. There's this undeniable rubber banding between expounding upon militaristic valor and a stringent commitment to marketing, annualizing, and commodifying real-world bloodshed. Much has been said about the ways in which Call of Duty has a less than virtuous relationship to war and colonialism, but it was not always this way. Call of Duty was originally, hilariously enough, the artistic and commercial response to the sort of one-man army superhero approach that so many FPS games had up until this point. It's why I think I love the single-player campaigns more than anything. Replaying every one of these for the video has reignited a sort of nostalgic ember in my subconscious. I think a lot of you who know me from my analytical conversations about video games and their artistic objectives will be surprised to hear that I am, for the most part, hugely positive about these games and their presentation and gameplay. I mean, sure, these games come with an absolute trash fire of political, social, cultural, philosophical, and ethical implications baked into the very core of these titles. Even then, I can't help but find a good deal of joy in the stories of Soap and Price, and the absurdity of the Treyarch titles, and the hilariously unintended comedy of a war drama like seen in Ghosts. I never start my videos like this, but the length of this one has to be an exception. On screen right now is a table of contents, as well as one in the description with links that should navigate you to the exact place you want to be, just in case you get lost or YouTube loses your place on multiple viewings. There are also timestamps in the description. I don't expect anyone to watch this all at once, so please use this. Furthermore, this is a deep dive into, almost every single Call of Duty game released as of early 2020. Its single-player campaigns, its multiplayer, and its respective co-op campaigns. I purchased and played through every single game and every single DLC. I played every campaign, all the co-op modes, all the zombies maps, and countless hours of multiplayer for this video. And of course, I'm not counting the near immeasurable amount of time I have played the series in my life up until this point. The only games missing are the mobile games, as capturing those are nigh on impossible legally. So please don't comment saying this isn't actually every Call of Duty game. I'm gonna ban you in real life. The video has taken hundreds of hours, and buying everything on Steam took almost 2 years of waiting for sales and bundles to finally get everything in a way that I can afford it. I've been thinking about this video for that long, but unfortunately, due to the length of this video, I won't be going into each game as deep as I do the other games on my channel. Only because, that video would be like 14 hours long. This is much more of a retrospective on these games to sit back on and celebrate their influence. So finally, please consider leaving a comment or a like on the video, as it has taken me months of work and effort. Don't do it until you are done and you actually liked it, of course, but please consider it, as this is free for everyone. Last thing, before we get stuck into it, I am launching a Patreon alongside this video. I know, another YouTube person with a Patreon. All I want you to do is consider the time and financial input of producing a video this long with all of the games and DLC, and consider giving if you find yourself capable. It is a lot to ask for in this weird time in human history. However, I'm confident everyone hearing this understands and gets that it is totally optional for you, and if you enjoy my content that much, then great. I say this knowing all of you are mature enough to know that you should only donate given you have 100% confidence it is financially responsible for you. I will talk more about this at the end of the video and what's going to be included and whatnot. The other way to support me is to come by my Twitch stream and consider tuning in or following. Or if you have Amazon Prime, you can get a free subscription to my channel, which also helps me financially. I promise I'm done now. Let's do this, eh? I actually love Call of Duty, believe it or not. I still have the CD case for the first game, which my brother and I got in 2003. I've since purchased every single Call of Duty game since, all but 2 of them at the very moment they were released. I love the campaigns, the multiplayer, and even the co-op modes. No one knows how many hours I've put into multiplayer matches on Call of Duty, and I'm confident I would shudder at that number. Call of Duty, despite its reputation in 2020, is almost assuredly my most played video game franchise of all time. And sure, like most of us, my relationship to the series has faltered quite a bit, but I cannot deny the influence of this massive entertainment pillar. I want to talk about these games as I would any other, but because of the sheer scope and size of a video like this, I will need to institute some structure and fair warning. For each game, I will be taking a second to analyze my favorite moment, level, or set piece from each game. These examples will be best understood as emblematic of the game itself and what it does uniquely from the others. I will also be doing this for the multiplayer modes, when relevant, and speaking on a map, mode, or a weapon that best exemplifies where that game succeeded most. Finally, I will be doing something similar for the cooperative modes as well. I am confident these games, especially the later ones, are to be understood as thematic pieces separated into 2 or 3 mechanical objectives. I think the multiplayer and the co-op are both important to our understanding of the series as a collective. So, my name is David OZ, and I'm excited to begin the Book of Call of Duty, this time all in one video. And I'm serious, the best way to help me is to please consider joining the Discord or visiting me in a live stream on Twitch. All the links are down below. Let's get into it. The first game of the franchise, Call of Duty, did a lot of things great for its time, but I'm confident that there is one mechanic that sets itself apart, not only as interactive software, but as a thematic approach to telling a war story in an interactive medium. That mechanic is names. Character names. Each friendly you come across has their name appear upon aiming at them. Now, I'm unsure on the mechanics of this, whether or not it is random or if it's scripted, but I can confidently say I don't want to know. Because these games do more for the tonal objective of this game than any blown-up French building or meticulously designed soundscape. These men that fight alongside you, Private Williamson or Sergeant James or, Private Nash, the names emphasize the humanity of the experience, that these were people who had jobs and lives, and not just members of the military and that's it. The names also add permanence to the war that really, truly existed in these units. A real soldier, not completely unlike the ones represented in the game, might only know someone by their last name. That does not take away from the severity of the loss of life, of course, and can often emphasize just how unfair and unbiased war really is. It is not unlikely that you die by catching a bullet not meant for you in war. It is not unlikely that you could do everything right, everything by the book, and still find yourself under an incoming mortar shell. War is a carefree killer. Having the names appear and then just as quickly disappear emphasizes the indiscriminate nature of war. Sometimes bullets have no biases, no objective other than point B. I can't speak for you, the viewer, but I have a distinct memory of me playing through early Call of Duty campaigns and sort of picking a squad mate, so to speak. Of the many NPC allied soldiers running around the levels, I would make it my goal for that mission to ensure their survival, to see them safely to the end of the level, and in my head, to their wife and kids. And sometimes that wouldn't happen. Sometimes they would go through the wrong door first and would be mowed down by an MP40. Now imagine that was really your squad mate, really your brother in arms. But actually, don't imagine that. Don't even think about it for too long. Because it's a good example of how Call of Duty deals with its irreconcilable issue of making a game about the muck and mire of war fun. War is, and let's not sugarcoat this at all, as antithetical to fun as absolutely possible. Call of Duty, especially the first, is absolutely fun. Call of Duty is not trying to represent the thoughts, emotions, the pain and torment of losing your squad mate on the battlefield in real life. Call of Duty is teasing out the tonal and edifying nature of the conflict of World War II, as if to say, it's okay to have fun here. This isn't real life. Just please make sure you consciously realize that. Because realizing that means that you are realizing the severity of warfare without sacrificing the enjoyment of the game itself. Call of Duty makes some of these conscious concessions to create a contrast that causes context. Call of Duty is very, very clearly not trying to express warfare, but it is edifying in that it gets you thinking about the mechanics and implications of warfare. I don't feel like I'm speaking for myself when I say that games like Medal of Honor and Call of Duty sparked an interest in World War II media and history that actually manifested a real appreciation for the pain and sacrifice the soldiers went through. Call of Duty isn't trying to reproduce that pain and sacrifice. It is trying to open the window for you to see from afar. I've often had conversations with people about what historical event I would go back in time and witness. The invasion of Normandy is one of them for me, but of course I would only ever agree to going back if I was given a sort of abstract floating observational booth from which I could experience the event from my bulletproof balcony. This doesn't make you a bad person if this also interests you. It doesn't degrade from the sacrifice made. It is a unique experience in human history, but it absolutely was not enjoyable for those that took part. Call of Duty games work best when they offer the balcony, when they don't try and blur the lines of realism and grit. Because for as long as I can accurately 360 no-scope a German 250 yards away under gunfire, Call of Duty is not realistic. The problems arrive when it tries to be regardless. And this, at its core, is the reason for the inception of Call of Duty as a game in the FPS genre. FPS at the time was all about the player, all about winning, scoring highly enough, doing the best of any soldier ever because you are the Doom guy, you are the secret agent, you are BJ Blazkowicz. Call of Duty as a direct response to this makes sense insofar that it asks you to be no more or less important than the soldiers around you. You are not always special. You are not always the best. You don't even get to raise the flag atop the Reichstag at the end of the game. You are important, but so is the man to your left and your right. Which really brings us to the game itself and its rhythms and gameplay. Call of Duty the First does an amazing thing with its construction, insofar that it captures not only 3 different theaters of war, but it also captures 3 different approaches to the war. The American campaign captures the approach of a unit, the rhythms and banter of the modern squad. This term really began to take its modern role during World War II because it was as close quarters of a conflict as been fought in a long time, certainly with firearms. I think one of the reasons World War II was such fertile ground for first-person shooters was exactly because of this. Gone were the days of lining up in fields or in trenches to take shots at each other. Now windows, alleyways, doors, and homes were cleared one by one with automatic weapons. What this does, at least mechanically for a video game, is emphasize the individual, insofar that warfare was less of one giant unit fighting one battle against another giant unit, but instead hundreds of little battles being fought across hundreds of squads between thousands of individual soldiers. These micro-battles created a specific and unique tension that lends itself to the concept of playing a video game. It empowers the individual, the player. The American campaign, I think, looks to capture that, the moment-to-moment micro-battles that ultimately develop into the macrocosm of the entire conflict. This is all to say that in a squad of 5, one soldier is a dreadfully devastating thing to lose. You are losing 20% of your operating power at that point. So you can begin to see how the first Call of Duty frames its wider thematic goal inside of the US squad. Each part of the military pyramid feeds into the next part and the previous part. Your ammunition feeds into your rifle, that feeds into your person feeds into your squad, which feeds into your company feeds into your division. The division feeds into the wider conflict of what was quite possibly the last enemy taken on by America that genuinely needed to be taken on. It all contributes to this idea that each element of the armed forces is necessary to complete the mission, and each must be operating truthfully and efficiently to ensure the elements before and after are capable of completing the objective. We actually get to see how this is deconstructed later on in the games in a cool subversion of this theme, but for now this is as optimistic and earnest an understanding of military practice as you can get, and I kind of love the almost childlike construction of it in these games. Call of Duty the First is not necessarily pro-war, but it is unapologetically, earnestly pro-bravery. These games are a celebration of the type of men who were genuine in their service and capable in their action. I love this about the games, and I think we should remember how positive it is toward the common soldier, as that could easily be considered one of the most clear thematic pillars the franchise takes down in the later games. The British campaign captures the approach of an individual, the precision and potency of one highly trained operative. These missions tend to carry the design ethos of the first-person shooters of old, the narrow corridors of limitless Nazis, the heroic actions of a real, awesome Player One. These missions aren't bad, but they do capture a necessary gameplay and thematic shift that keeps the game from being too one-note. But they are not where Call of Duty shines as a piece of rhetoric. And if we want to talk about shining, we must finally mention the Soviet campaign. The campaign captures the approach of a collective, a genuine war machine that can change the tide of the entire war in one unified push. And I'm unsure if the Russian armies actually did assault the occupying Nazis in such a way. I would probably say they did not, in reality, but whether or not it is used as a stereotype popularized by war movies, it still stands effective as a peripheral point in Call of Duty's thematic triangle. The Soviet campaign does what we will learn Call of Duty makes a habit of doing in biting off little bits and pieces from World War II films like Enemy at the Gates. I don't mean this as a criticism. I think it's kind of neat, actually. The interactivity of storming Stalingrad is different from the cinematic experience of the storming of Stalingrad. I tend to love this about games. It further solidifies the idea that Call of Duty isn't asking you to actively participate in war, but to see it through the safety of your window, or the television, to overly explain the metaphor here. Each of these mechanical constructions tell the player a little bit about the thematic and cultural objectives of the country in which you are fighting for, at least in earnest stereotype. In that sense, the levels are linear and can sometimes be samey. It isn't groundbreaking video game analysis to say Call of Duty tends to be more about the spectacle and context of the level as opposed to the level design itself. But Call of Duty the First doesn't have terrible level design for its time. There's a good deal of naturalistic level design in the French and Russian streets, and less so in the British campaign due to the corridors. But occasionally the levels have some nonlinearity to them that makes them somewhat special. The snowy level towards the end of the game is probably the best example of this, as it usually gives you another Plan B route around an enemy emplacement. Most of the level design of the early Call of Duty games has you confront spawning enemies, take cover, and either take them out with accuracy straight on, or navigate to the left or right to flank them from the side. A majority of the combat encounters play out like this in a Call of Duty game, and that's okay for their relatively short runtimes. It's maybe not okay for someone who's playing almost 20 of these games in a row for one YouTube video, but I really wouldn't recommend doing that. Don't ask me how I know. Call of Duty is a borderline immaculately designed first-person shooter spectacle. It plays well even today in 2020. The game runs smoothly, and its levels expand far beyond the starting point, giving the game that pace and forward momentum that will soon become iconic to the franchise. But more on that later. I find myself loving Call of Duty more and more each time I play it, each time I think about it. My brother and I purchased this game from Walmart in 2003 when it came out. I still have the jeweled CD case in my hometown home. We fell in love with the stories we could make in the campaigns, and the strategies we could come up with to best make our way through as many Germans as possible. I even adore the borderline naivete of Call of Duty's tone and presentation. I adore its mechanics, the way that it introduced aiming down sights so crisp and cleanly when it has never been done as well before. I cannot get over how good the Soviet campaign is, how memorable that speech is on the boat to Stalingrad. The ember that was my love for first-person shooter games just had to have been lit in 2003 with this game. It sparked 17 years of reading about World War II, about watching movies and connecting with my dad over history and weaponry from the time. And finally, it sparked a love for one more very, very important thing for me in my relationship to video games: online multiplayer. Now, even as early as 2003, a lot of the rhythms of Call of Duty multiplayer that we know today were established here already. The frenetic pace, sure, but also the forward momentum and quick respawns. COD wanted to establish itself as a multiplayer game to be consumed in bites, in short 10-minute sequences so as to never overwhelm or wear out its player. We're going to talk a lot about these games and their multiplayers, but especially the ways in which they became such an addiction for so many gamers everywhere. A multiplayer game in this Call of Duty is never going to overstay its welcome. I mean, if anything, it slightly understays. Once your team deathmatch game is over, you will often end up thinking to yourself, man, that was so short. I bet I could have gotten at least 10 more kills. Thus, you try again your next game. Each life encourages you to push forward and be aggressive, and try again once you inevitably die. The same can be said about each match. Search and Destroy on the map Harbor, Rifles Only, was the coliseum in which I learned how to be elite FPS gamer boy. Before people were 1v1ing snipers on Shipment, people were adding each other on X-Fire to 1v1 on the modded map Wawa. Experiencing this time in Call of Duty truly makes you an OG of the series. If any of you did this in 2003 or 4, please let me know. It's such a special memory of my childhood that my brother and I laugh about to this day. The multiplayer here is genuinely, surprisingly awesome. A lot of the core design philosophy of what makes a COD multiplayer match work was formed here, from the quick time to kill to the fast-moving character models. Things like drop-shotting and air-strafing started to become annoyingly effective strategies in this game before it ever did in the future games. The Call of Duty map design was beginning to be solidified here, but not quite to the degree that it fully reaches further in COD 4 and Modern Warfare 2, but we'll talk about it then. I almost have nothing but positive memories of the first game of this franchise, and I am confident that those who played at the time feel the same way. Even saying that, I think this game is still a joy as a game, even now in 2020. To me, United Offensive is exactly one of the things I miss so much from video games nowadays. We just don't get too many genuine expansion packs anymore, additive experiences that build off of the existing engine and assets. United Offensive looks to take a lot of the beats and emphasis put onto Call of Duty's level design and start implementing some of the decisions we will see manifest in COD 2. We see bigger battles, louder battles, more bodies, and more enemies appearing on screen. Where Call of Duty wanted to express the individual heroism of the many building toward a common goal, a duty, then United Offensive wants to tackle the brutality of a conflict that you are not always on the winning side of. It is no accident, then, that the game starts you in the Battle of the Bulge, a scenario that put the Allied soldiers in so dire of a situation that it was not unlikely that the result of the battle could very well invalidate and eradicate a good majority of the progress made since the Normandy invasion. The stakes were incredibly high here, and it is reflected in the gameplay's insistence on running enemies down your throat. This was the Axis's last opportunity at turning the tides of war, and United Offensive subverts its name in the first 20 minutes by forcing you to unite in a defensive effort against the Axis offensive. You get a lot of the aspects of iconic franchise presentation in this game as well, resulting in some of the most impressive visual artistry I've seen from a game this age. We will learn as we go through these games that they care deeply for the presentation of the combined military force. Call of Duty loves to show its militaries unite, to show the planes dogfighting overhead while artillery screams above the foot soldiers. Call of Duty, the franchise that is, loves to put you in as many diverse boots and seats as possible, from the seat of a tank commander to the suit of an astronaut. While this was certainly present in the first game, this legacy really kicks off here in United Offensive. So let me expand on this, because not only do I think this broadly explains what could be considered a major thesis statement to understanding the franchise's entire ethos, but it also has to be one of the things I love most dearly about the games. Not only do you see the other militaries, like when it switches you to a British bombing plane in one of the game's best levels, but you also experience and witness it, even from the foot soldier's perspective. Play through these games yourself and count how many times you and your fellow foot soldiers are bailed out by a squadron of P-51 Mustangs soaring overhead, or when the armored division arrives precisely when it means to, or when a shelling attack stalls the advancing forces. It's tropey and sometimes overdone, but it hammers home a real stance that the game is taking on the military. You are only as sturdy as the other branches attached to the tree. It is a combined effort, a united offensive that assures victory. And you know, I kind of like that. When games are saying something about their subject matter, Call of Duty does well for itself by putting this unification front and center. And Call of Duty as a franchise is actually really pretty awesome at doing this kind of thing through its visual and set-piece design. They say a lot about war and combat without actually using any words. For example, the game also asks you to consider sacrifice in a way that the previous game's earnest portrayal of military service didn't really have you confront so directly. Remember when we talked about how the character names encourage this idea of togetherness, but also the lack of bias of warfare? The indifference of how character deaths are treated in this story is interesting to me, because they will have characters that you have spent missions with instantly perish in a matter of seconds. Take a look at one of the British Spec Ops missions where you infiltrate a German position to destroy artillery. You have voiced characters supporting you who are present with you the entire mission. They banter and talk about just like any other characters. Near the end of the mission, during your escape, the lorry they are occupying explodes, killing a number of your squad mates. The game refuses to treat it as drama. Compared to how the future games handle death and how we're going to look at the melodrama of character death in these games down the road, this comes as a pretty clear thematic difference that will be somewhat hilarious going on in the series. As a general rule, this game treats death in a way that seems so consistent with its wider goal. Your squad mates and friends will die, but it's never indulgently so. You will never see legs flying off or screaming while burning alive. It is acknowledged as a reality of war, but like the rest of the game, it's not trying to be so realistic that it's a direct representation of the war itself. It's a window into the war that you can watch from afar. It's not putting you there, and so the deaths aren't going to either. Did you know that AC/DC's singer Brian Johnson provides the voice acting for Sergeant Starkey in Call of Duty Finest Hour? How about this? Did you know that Call of Duty Finest Hour's first campaign is an almost set-for-set remake of the movie Enemy at the Gates? Even Tanya, a character you meet in the game, shares the same exact name with a character in the movie. Well, did you know that Call of Duty Finest Hour has one of my favorite missions in all of these games? And I've played them all, you see. Because it does, and it has to do with Tanya as well. There's this awesome mission where you are paired with a ruthless sniper atop a broken building in Stalingrad. You've seen it before. You have an objective where you must take a German bunker on top of a hill and replace the flag with the Soviet flag. It's actually a great take on the corridor shooters that still exist on the console at the time, and the methodical clearing of the trenches all the way up to the top gives it a real feeling of pride and accomplishment once you've actually reached the top. When you compare this mission to the rest of the game, too, it becomes clear how much of a marvel it is for the console in the time it came out. I have a lot of great memories playing the console version of these games. I found it hilarious replaying it for this video because I remembered this game so clearly. And let me tell you, it looked a lot closer to Enemy at the Gates than, well, this. It's funny how our memories of video games are so insanely different from the product. Just take a look at Final Fantasy VII versus the recent remake that came out recently. I feel like the remake is how I remember the original game looking. Even with the notion that these games are somewhat actually lesser than our ideas and memories of them, they still have some stellar set-piece design that is derivative of the PC releases, but consistent in their excellence in presentation. The Stalingrad opening doesn't miss a beat in setting the tone for the game, and certainly the introduction and speech near the beginning isn't shying away from its name. This game is bordering on adorable in its adoration of the titular Call of Duty. The opening cinematic, while giving me goosebumps of nostalgia, could be argued to be a tone setter that prepares you for such an unrealistic optimism of the military that it could be seen as condescending. And look, the reality is my interpretation of these games is largely colored by the fact that I played them all in a row. I saw the tides come and go of anti-war narratives to pro-military narratives to a little bit of both. And I guess where this leaves me with Finest Hour is a feeling that Call of Duty, only Call of Duty games, deal in absolutes. If we're going to criticize the future games for being downright fatalistic in their interpretations of humanity and its relationship to war, then we should also look to see how its nuanceless approach to military duty is also a simplification of a complex set of circumstances. At times, Finest Hour approaches propagandistic levels of wartime adoration. These are games, after all, about maybe as horrific as a wartime location can become, like in Stalingrad. Which isn't to take away from the heroics at all. These men and women were as heroic as the games make them out to be. You would just never guess it in this one because of how dramatized and exaggerated the messaging here is. It comes off less as a meaningful tribute to the heroics of the men and women fighting in World War II, and more of a Saturday morning cartoon from 1944 to get kids into the military. We're going to see how Call of Duty actually responds to this in games like World at War, where it attempts to portray a side of the war that these games, arguably insincerely, ignore. My point is, when we talk about these games devolving from game to game, about the literal Call of Duty and heroics in battle, we can't assume that they started out on perfect footing and went downhill. Each of these games carry a frustrating degree of either fatalistic nihilism or pro-military justification. Some obviously worse than others. It's kind of up to the reader to decide which is the least palatable. And this has got to be in the top 5 least enjoyable Call of Duty games for me, at least to play. The Russian campaign shines here, just like in the first game. The nostalgia is fun, but for every good mission, which this game does have 2 or 3, we get a 3 or 4 painfully linear corridor shooting galleries. We didn't know much better back then, but goodness does this game drag on. This is, all without commenting on the fact that Dark Souls has a more forgiving checkpoint system than Call of Duty Finest Hour. I had more than one absolutely soul-crushing death that set me back 20 minutes or more. This game is no joke, guys. You will die, and the static health that you have to regain with sparse health pickups around the map make taking a hit an absolute chore to recover from. The future games had the right idea by adding regenerating health, by the way. I'm just going to go ahead and spoil that take right now. And I obviously can't comment too much on the multiplayer, but I do remember playing the game split screen 1v1 with my brother quite a bit growing up. We're going to talk quite a bit more about the console exclusive version of these games when we get to Big Red 1, so let's go ahead and move on. If we're talking about ranking our favorite Call of Duty games, then I have to say Call of Duty 2 is high up on that list. This game is the essential World War II shooter in my book. As a product, it iterates on a lot of the progress that the first game excelled in, while adding a good deal of production quality and set design. This game was the first to introduce regenerating health, which streamlined the frenetic pace the games have established until this point. It brought forth a cleaner, more accessible multiplayer, as well as a more diverse theater of warfare than many other games were showcasing at the time. That's the game as a product, but as media, as a piece of rhetoric about war and about the Call of Duty, it succeeds as well. I think one of the most important aspects to note about this game's successes is that it finally takes you away from a lot of the same old World War II locations. You will be fighting in North Africa, crossing the Rhine, and defending... Stalingrad. Yeah, I won't lie, opening these games with Stalingrad missions gets a bit grating when I am certain there are a number of better places to be fighting Germans in Russia. I still love how in the first couple of missions they start to flex their new graphical prowess by putting you in a pipe above a snowy German emplacement. This scene is still great to this day. As the bullets open the pipe for light to stream in, it goes on the list of iconic Call of Duty moments for me, and is one of the first times the series begins to establish itself as less of a history-driven shooter and more of a supremely high-polished roller coaster that is themed toward realism. And ultimately, this is the right call, and Call of Duty 2 starts this process. Call of Duty's single player succeeds fully when it embraces what the developers exceed most at. Infinity Ward are literal industry powerhouses when it comes to creating visually interesting and clever scenarios. Look, say what you will about these games and their linearity or how they are mindless shooting galleries, but I struggle to think of games that were pulling together so many artistically focused levels, properly timed and tonally consistent music, and clever situations so effortlessly. In a Call of Duty game, presentation is both king and queen. It's as if all of the sensory aspects that go into building an interactive presentation act in the same way that Call of Duty believes the military to act, which is to say that each element is reliant and enhanced by the other elements involved. Call of Duty is a questionably good to great series of video games, but their visual flair, their presentation, their commitment to the compelling, that is what sells me on these games. Take a look at the last mission, Crossing the Rhine. It's a whirlwind of just about everything that can make a good Call of Duty level good. And if you analyze the whole mission, you will realize that Infinity Ward created the blueprint in Call of Duty 2 for almost every single COD single-player game going forward. And that's really not an exaggeration. The mission ebbs and flows, sure, but more than anything, it hits the player with at least 4 different key pillars to a Call of Duty mission. I think these 4 key pillars inform every good Call of Duty mission going forward. The first one I would describe as a moment or shtick. In this level, it has to be the beach landing and turret sequence. A lot of levels will try to have at least one shtick. It could be the reconnecting of the telephone wires in the Soviet campaign, mortar throwing in the end mission of World at War, or the ghillie suits in COD 4. Here the level is actually starting with an inversion of the previously played beach landing of Normandy by putting you in a situation you don't normally see in World War II media. I tend to dislike the turret sections in these games, but it works here because the target is suppression and aggression rather than defending against hordes of enemies. The second pillar to a successful Call of Duty level going forward is diversity. Diversity in cast, diversity in action, and diversity in arenas. A good Call of Duty mission has you doing an appropriate amount of things in an appropriate amount of time, but all in good balance. There should never be too much corridor shooting, too much of tank driving, or too much of wave defense. Crossing the Rhine has you go from turret section to beach landing, street clearing to building clearing, then open-ended objective clearing in an open area. The third thing a Call of Duty mission tends to have is some sort of calm, an integral moment of respite in the chaos of a 20 or so minute skirmish. The placement changes a lot in these missions. They never have to be at the beginning or the end. Oftentimes they will exist somewhere in the middle, giving the characters a chance to talk a bit and the player a chance to wipe the sweat and Cheeto dust from their input device of choice. Quiet time does a lot for a war game like this, insofar that it doubles as tension and finality. Tension in the sense that, well, it is war after all. Snipers don't wait for you to finish your break. In that sense, you can't really ever be calm. But for what it's worth, there has to be some sort of note that must ring out so the player knows they are safe. And that's what we see here in Crossing of the Rhine, a calm happening right at the end of the mission and subsequently the end of the game. It marks a thematic ending as well as an interactive one, in that the Crossing of the Rhine will actually begin to mark the end of the war. The final is a bit harder to pin down, because it's not exactly specific, but I would just call it forward level design. Call of Duty to me is all about progression and forward momentum. The worst levels I can think of are the ones that have you sitting in the same spot for a long time, shooting down upon hordes and hordes of enemies. When you think of your favorite mission in a COD game, oftentimes it has you moving forward through an area, through the fields and all gillied up, through the beaches of Normandy, or through the neighborhoods of the United States under Russian invasion. Crossing the Rhine really exemplifies the building-to-building combat necessary at the end of the war. It contrasts so well with the catastrophe that was Market Garden, insofar that the Allies here are confidently moving forward and clearing, as opposed to running and, well, dying. Call of Duty 2 is all about these sort of near-perfectly crafted 20-minute menageries of gunfire. If there is a lasting legacy for Call of Duty 2, it's this. It's a game that hits on a lot of the same thematic and historical objectives that the first game and its expansion intended to do, but with more confidence and bravery in its diverse presentation of the lesser portrayed theaters of war. It's a notable improvement in visuals, graphics, and presentation. More importantly, however, you could argue that Call of Duty single player was not born here, but had its formative years here. The very construction of some levels that you will see in Modern Warfare 3 or Black Ops 2 or Advanced Warfare can be traced back to some of the levels in this game. And I think that's awesome, especially when you play all of these games in a row. What goes for its single player must go for the multiplayer as well, although not quite to the degree that we will see with Call of Duty 4. Some of the main aspects of a COD multiplayer match were born in COD 2, which weren't present in the first iteration. Aspects such as red dots on the radar appearing when someone shoots, and of course, regenerative health. A lot of the map design was taken from the first game, however, with the most memorable hit being Tunisia, a map that started Call of Duty Rifles Only Search and Destroy as a genuine esport to be taken seriously. People competed in COD 2, and while the scene was small for sure, 3-lane, 2-bomb site map design started to make its name in maps like Tunisia. COD 2 was also very much a PC game, despite it being released as a launch title for the 7th generation of consoles. Modding, server browsers, and 64-player servers were ever popular on COD 2 back through 2006, and really to 2007 given that the third installment was never released on PC. I spent a lot of time on Call of Duty 2 multiplayer growing up, and while no map ever reached the heights of Harbor for me, returning favorites like Carentan occupied hundreds of hours for little old David. Hours that, if I had them back, I'd probably just play more COD 2 multiplayer matches. I remember them that fondly. It wasn't until playing through Call of Duty 2 Big Red 1 that something occurred to me about the console-exclusive versions of these games. Look, they're not bad. Take it from me that they occupied a lot of time for past Dave, but I am confident that they don't hold a candle to the mainline Call of Duty games. What occurred to me is this. Do you remember how up until about the PS4 generation, every big-time movie that came out also got a video game adaptation? Oftentimes they were bad, sometimes they were okay. Very rarely were they very good. There were the Wolverine games, the Star Wars games, the Spider-Man games, the Lord of the Rings games. Those were awesome. But Call of Duty Finest Hour, Call of Duty 2 Big Red 1, and Call of Duty World at War Final Fronts were the video game adaptations of the analogous films that were Call of Duty and Call of Duty 2. Which again is not necessarily a bad thing or an indictment of these games. A game like Call of Duty 2 Big Red 1 hits on all of the thematic objectives of Call of Duty 2 and puts the player in slightly new places with slightly new situations. Some of these work, and some of them absolutely do not. This game was far and away the most frustrating and least enjoyable I had to play for the whole series. A lot of that is just the PS2 jank, but a lot of it was just an astounding lack of polish and another reshowing of the punishing checkpoint system. What happens when you play these games all in a row is that you realize you are just getting a watered-down version of the source material. And ultimately, I can't really criticize this about the games because this is much more of being commercially advantageous rather than an artistic failure. The PS2 was owned by millions upon millions of people, and to ignore them was to miss out on a tremendous amount of money. A lot of the feelings contributing toward the game feeling like a watered-down version has to do with them being developed on lesser hardware by developers with less time and resources. Which is funny because especially in the case of Big Red 1, these games actually carry a huge amount of forward-thinking ideas and mechanics that find themselves in most Call of Duty games going forward. Most notably in this game is the fact that this is really the first Call of Duty game that introduces this sort of character-driven story that becomes a standard for most every single Call of Duty game going forward. Previously, these games have been less focused on the individual and more so focused on the universal heroics of members of multiple countries' militaries. Starting in this game, you start to see individual characters start to be built with individual personalities and roles in a story. It follows the same sort of narrative direction of Band of Brothers, a story built around getting to know a squad of soldiers as opposed to the sort of theater hopping we saw in the previous games. It actually has a lot of the actors from that series voice acting the characters in the game also. What really matters is that this is Treyarch's first real shot at developing a Call of Duty game, and it is certainly notable that the rest of the Call of Duty games going forward seem to follow this trend of personality-driven stories. It's a franchise staple that actually started in Big Red 1, and I think that's really cool to point out. The game even has this non-chronological mission structure that starts you in a mission titled, "We've Been Through Worse," and then throws you back to invasions the squad has been through previous to the starting mission. It's nothing earth-shattering, but it is a change of the fundamental structure of a campaign in a Call of Duty game, and really solidifies Treyarch as the developer who zags when Infinity Ward zigs. For better or for worse, Treyarch will always take the odd way through its stories, and they make that clear in their first go at a COD game. I think there is a tendency to say that Treyarch started to push the Call of Duty games in a different, more pulpy and gruesome direction with World at War, but I find it interesting that you can see them laying the groundwork for those games with both Big Red 1 and Call of Duty 3. By nature of the more character-driven stories, you will find more opportunities to solidify both the individual heroics and tragedies of warfare. Where the battlefields of previous Call of Duty showed the collective heroics and tragedy in its body-strewn fields, these games look to hammer home the pain and sacrifice of your brothers in arms. One shows how unbiased war can be in its slaughter, the other shows how sometimes war can seem absolutely biased in the way it can systematically rip apart squads of your best friends. Both are their own forms of tragedy. Neither are inherently more cynical or idealistic on their own. Of course, though, Call of Duty wouldn't be Call of Duty without a fair share of performative idealism. And as we mentioned before, Big Red 1 pulls frequently and unashamedly from a fruitful legacy of Second World War media. One thing I've always loved from World War II media is the legacy and the lore of the German Tiger tank. It was, for lack of a more sensitive way of putting it, as close to a final boss as reality can get. I've read that the Allies would need roughly 5 Shermans to every German Tiger tank. It was an incomprehensibly terrifying mechanical monstrosity, a force of nature seemingly unconquerable by traditional warfare. I don't think people realize how ahead of its time this machine was, and how frightening it was for the Allies. The opening level actually puts you against one, crucially showing, well, a lot of people dying to it. It's interesting in the context of a Call of Duty game because in no small terms, a German Tiger tank is a straight-up video game boss fight. There's a lot to like here, and even with me calling these games essentially the licensed movie games of the franchise, I was still left with a pleasant sort of aftertaste after playing these games, as if I experienced something really neat in the wider history of the franchise. A lot of great ideas were experimented upon in these games, almost all of them hiding behind financial and technological concessions that make the moment-to-moment gameplay a bit of a chore. In that sense, I loved these games as a sort of period piece in the legacy that is Call of Duty, and not so much as actual video games. Call of Duty 3 isn't actually that bad, and if you remember it being bad, you're probably thinking about the multiplayer, or maybe I'm just easily impressed. The unfortunate reality about this game is, and it has to be said early because it colors the entire reading of the game, is that it was rushed through development in about 8 months. It was running on a bizarre engine by a developer who was pushed into following up one of the best World War II shooters of all time. There was always going to be few universes wherein this game was actually good. Almost none where it was excellent like its predecessors. And look, I won't lie, I've been playing a lot of Call of Duty games, and we have a lot of Call of Duty games to go. But I am getting pretty tired of shooting Germans in French alleyways and hillsides. In terms of its setting and art, Call of Duty 3 does little to separate itself from the games we've already covered. In terms of thematics, however, Call of Duty 3 is the first mainline game that really starts to bring Call of Duty forward to what people know the series as now. Heroics from individuals, from a select few that the game deems important to and beside Player 1. However, we're not quite there. Call of Duty 3 is still absolutely concerned with the valor and the call to duty that men stood up for in the 20th century. It's still willing to show the massive troop movements, the collaboration of all parts of the military toward a greater good. It's still a relatively idealistic war shooter, mainly looking to just showcase, not recreate the very real sacrifice that occurred in France. COD 3 even has you taking on the role of some of the less spoken about factions in the Second World War, such as the Canadian and the Polish forces. Through the light of the glory and valor emerge occasional shadows that we will soon see envelop the entire franchise, though. Shadows of cynicism, of the brutality of war, of pain and gratuitous violence. In Call of Duty 3, we begin to see death and destruction in quantities not seen so far. We hear screaming and burning and dying louder than ever. We see an approach to conflict that we haven't actually gotten quite yet from a Call of Duty game. That war is disgusting, it's full of misery, and your friends will die. They will die in unfair ways, they will die for dumb reasons, and they will die for each other. It is punctuated by the character-driven storytelling that is new to these recent games, and it comes as a bit of a shock to the system when compared to the idealism of something like Finest Hour. However, this isn't all bad. The comforting thing is that these unique campaigns don't feel like the cynical interpretation I had of them going in. They are earnest and appropriate windows into the specific sacrifices that these armies made, not necessarily just Call of Duty running out of ideas on how to portray the conflict in Europe and scraping the proverbial bottom of the barrel. The game, in turn, makes an endearing attempt at hitting on every war movie stereotype it can in its characters, from the archetypal war-weary sergeant, the painfully stereotypical French resistance storyline, to the coward who redeems himself in sacrifice at the end. Call of Duty 3 takes its tropes more from the characters than it does the settings. In that sense, COD 3 veers towards the cinematic more so than any of the other games to this point. It veers, but oftentimes into a median rather than the exit lane towards cinema. Look no further than the awkward and uncomfortable QuickTime events that confusingly made it through development. Developed years after the first God of War game, COD 3 finds itself having you play a rhythm game of specific button jamming and analog stick caressing to do things like plant a bomb. Yes, what was once a single button now involves a tedious series of flicking and gyrating. And for what? It does nothing for the player in terms of immersion, and its presentation feels gamier than ever as your Xbox controller buttons appear in front of a German you're killing in cold blood. It's a baffling design decision that lies under a wider problem with the moment-to-moment gameplay in general. I do know why, however. Treyarch was making an effort to solidify themselves as the developer who really shows it how it is and really puts you into the war. You can often see throughout this game the beginnings of the violence and brutality that will characterize so many Treyarch CODs going forward, and the close quarters combat QuickTime events were one of the first glimmers of exactly this. Oftentimes people will attribute World at War of this role, saying it started the fetishistic obsession with violence-fueled interactivity that Call of Duty embodies, when in reality they were doing it briefly here, in COD 3. Look, we will quickly learn to see Treyarch as the more arcadey of the two developers, but the chest-high cover-filled battle arenas and enemy density lend this game to being played more as a Quake campaign than a military shooter. For better or for worse, and this is just something we are going to have to acknowledge in my analysis, is that I played these games practically back to back, and my entire interpretation of them is colored by exactly that. Call of Duty 3 is more video gamey, more transparent in its mechanical and interactive objectives, and it becomes distracting to the overall experience. More than anything, though, it masks a truly endearing and oftentimes exciting take on the Normandy we have seen 5 times prior. There's a genuinely good Call of Duty game here. It's just abundantly clear that at this point in time, Infinity Ward had written the book on how to create a mainline blockbuster Call of Duty game. Treyarch is just playing some serious catch-up with Call of Duty 3. The Treyarch Call of Duty trail is being blazed in 2006, though, which I think is a really cool thing to map out. They even implement some non-linearity in the mission design to give the player the opportunity to take on objectives in different ways, even though oftentimes it goes down to either going left or right. Treyarch is playing catch-up, sure, but it is a catch-up worthy of appreciation and acknowledgement. I find myself appreciating that more and more as I play through these games, as they grow older and reach further and further into the formulaic. When you hear someone say all Call of Duty games are the same, it often brings back fun memories when people didn't think that was the case. It brings memories of when Call of Duty wasn't a product closer to Madden than Band of Brothers. Call of Duty, as we know it, is now a product, a commodification. It is Madden, it is the Super Bowl, it's Grey's Anatomy. Sure, the proper nouns might change, but it still is Call of Duty each year. I tend to like it still, but I know what I'm getting every single time. Each year when I purchase a Call of Duty game, I know that the men and women developing it are building off a foundation of almost 2 decades of sculpting around the same material. But this wasn't always the case. This wasn't always what was going to happen when you purchased a Call of Duty game at the store. And for that, I'm oddly nostalgic for games like Big Red 1 and Call of Duty 3. Call of Duty games that tried new things, mainly underperformed, and then tried a new thing. It's really hard to find a game nowadays, but the game did the same thing for its multiplayer mode, which included radically different gameplay opportunities, including 24-player matches and vehicles. The multiplayer in this one attempted to reimagine what Call of Duty United Offensive's multiplayer mode succeeded in, and what COD 3's campaign attempted to capture: large-scale conflict with arcade-style movement and hitboxes. If it sounds like they were trying to have their cake and eat it too, well, they were. The multiplayer is nowhere near as polished an experience as found in COD 1 or 2, and in terms of large scale, it didn't commit nearly enough to be compared to the likes of something like Battlefield 2 at the time. But even then, we saw things like new game modes, objectives, weapons, and even classes to choose from like a hero shooter. This game was trying, ladies and gentlemen. Again, endearing and earnest attempt at creating something worth distinguishing from Infinity Ward? Absolutely. Effective? In closing, I think what I want for these developers is to just quit making tank missions. I'm so tired of them. Look, I guess this is pretty subjective, but they might as well be my least favorite Call of Duty thing out there. And every single one of them are functionally identical to each other. They're dreadfully boring. Can we just get like a hashtag tank missions are over party in the chat, please?
Baseplate, this is Hammer 2-4. We have visual on the target. ETA 60 seconds. Copy 2-4. Seconds, going dark. 10 seconds. Radio check. Go to secure channel. Lock and load. Green light. Go, go, go. Weapons free.
I mean, come on. Come on. We're looking at one of the most influential, most powerful, premier, the platonic ideal of a linear first-person shooter. Okay. I cannot understate the ways in which this game has aged in such interesting, captivating ways. I cannot overstate how this game has avoided being overrated. It maneuvered real-world social and political topics with confident aggression and grace. It weaponized a real, authorially consistent stance on something. It maintained an ideological position on a post-Iraq world about the insincerity of Western militarization, of the imbalance of powers in the 21st century, and about the role of countries and their obligations to the world at large. And it also managed to define an entire generation of competitive multiplayer, scorching the earth of every other shooter at the time and fertilizing that ground with the seeds of future FPS clones. And out from those ashes grew a forest of ubiquity, of experience bars, kill streaks, and camo unlocks. The multiplayer video game world can and really should be understood as being a world of two ages, pre-COD 4 and post-COD 4. Its impact was that noticeable. Call of Duty 4 stands tall as a genuine stalwart to the Call of Duty ideal that people long for today. It was positioned, confident, opinionated, and purposeful. That alone is one of my favorite memories of this title, a memory that stands in such stark contrast to the Call of Duties we will cover. This was a game developed by human beings, with authorial intention and opinions, with diverse opinions and motivations. Its stances may age poorly or beautifully, but they age because they exist. I just can't say that about the sort of boardroom-built Call of Duty games that peek their way into the future titles. Call of Duty 4 is a phenomenal video game. I am certain of it. But Call of Duty was always a little bit like The Bachelor, especially in its early days. I know. The show clearly isn't real, right? It obviously isn't meant to be taken as a real exploration of love, but it is close enough that one can, for at least 2 hours at a time, suspend their disbelief in a way that allows for you to get into it. You see? One can't over-explain the main thesis of this whole video, right? Call of Duty is meant to be a window into war, just like The Bachelor might be a window into love. It's not that The Bachelor is hated for being entertaining or not. That was never the question. The problem becomes when the show drifts out of its lane into trying to convince the viewer that it is real, that this really is people trying to find love. Because it isn't, and Call of Duty is not war. And it's best when they keep that in mind. So up until this point, we have seen in games like COD 3 and Big Red 1 that Call of Duty was willing to crack open that window a little bit, to let the viewer in a bit more on what the experience of actually being in war might be like. The violence and the horror, the terrifying realities of war that can actually be showed in media. I am not saying that it's impossible for the media to represent war, but that Call of Duty's mechanics and action movie set pieces are closer to Tropic Thunder than Saving Private Ryan. I say this because I think Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare kind of solves this problem, at least in theory. Call of Duty speaks about war and its mechanics and thematics. It has a real point to be made about real war, and unlike The Bachelor, it is actually saying something about love. Warfare, sorry. When Infinity Ward titled this game Modern Warfare, they were not praising the uncapitalized idea of modern warfare. They are saying with meaningful brevity that this experience is going to address the tonal and mechanical intricacies of modern warfare. It was never a celebration. If anything, it was a cautionary tale of the stark fear, insecurity, and uncomfortability of a post-war on terror world. This game is the story of modern warfare, not just a game that includes it. So let me just dive in a bit on one of my favorite things about this game. If you watch a lot of my videos, you will probably be rolling your eyes right now. But look, Modern Warfare has some darn shootin' good ludonarrative synchronicity, insofar that its mechanics instantly support the main theme of the game. This game is crucially not the sort of Soviet or American missions that you found in Call of Duties of yore. The mechanics and level design of this game are not to imply that the might of warfare comes from the collective. No. COD 4 insists that the might of the military comes from the absolute precision of as few people as possible. The fact that your guns in COD 4 shoot with laser-like precision, that your guns come equipped with silencers and gadgets galore, these are all absolutely intentional in their design. Because guess what? You are the big brother in this game. You are the bully. You are the 6'4" high school senior in gym class, and your enemies are the incoming freshmen. You are meant to cut through your enemies with deadly precision, with gadgets and gizmos aplenty. You are meant to kill with modern warfare. How many people do you kill in this game that have absolutely zero chance of ever fighting back? The precision of the gameplay is important, insofar that the sound design with silencers combine with the laser lethality of your rifles to create a feeling of you being absolutely technologically and skillfully ahead of your many, many opponents. Does it ever feel uncomfortable gunning down people who have absolutely no business being in the same weight class as you? Probably not. It's a fun video game, right? But should it? I don't know. I think maybe it should at least get you thinking about how different warfare is in the 21st century. Ultimately, this is the legacy of COD 4 to me. The fact that the game captures the power fantasy of a super soldier and contextualizes it into a commentary on modern warfare. It is asking, does our superior military and technology mean we should be the world's police force? Just because we can exterminate with immaculate precision, should we? In that sense, it captures two different questions. One of the Task Force 141 Special Forces operation, and the other of the United States military. Both forces carry different interpretations, and both connect in that they are almost always wiping the floor with whomever they are fighting. Take the first mission as Americans, for example, an absolute blitzkrieg of militaristic might. The opening images of our military should instantly strike memories of television screens showing newscasts of the wars in the Middle East. Dozens of helicopters soar over militia who have RPGs with no guiding capabilities, rifles propagated in the 1960s, and little to no advanced arms training. You swoop down to electric guitars and oorahs only to mercilessly cut through waves of enemies who have no business fighting the forces of America. You arrive at your destination only to hear that the intel was wrong. The objective you arrived there for wasn't there. You are told that you need to move out and keep looking, as if nothing had changed in the last 30 minutes of bloodshed. The mission isn't intended to be a celebration of American military might. It's a cautionary tale. If you get excited about the music and the killing, you're missing the point. It is supposed to capture the skepticism of an Iraq war upbringing, the insecurity of action, the ever-present nagging, what are we really doing here? It focuses in on that insecurity and contrasts it with such tight and mechanically interesting construction that it and I don't use this often, perfectly captures both the tonal and mechanical beats of what a war post-2001 looks like. It's frightening then to see how the future games unironically embody everything this game intends to critique about warfare in the 21st century, specifically the titularly identical most recent COD. When you hear about Call of Duty being fetishistically pro-military, people are not talking about this game. This game is firmly against the sort of aimless policing showcased by the West in the 2000s, and that sentence is not an interpretation of the game, it is a summary. Look no further than the blinding mushroom cloud that envelops hundreds of thousands of innocents in the middle part of the game. Not only do you die here, but so too does your squad, your friends, your enemies, innocents, and any idea that this game was pro-military. The invasion leads to suffering and death in the hundreds of thousands. You, the player, are killed. You do not escape with heroic excellence. You burn and die in the dirt alongside every other casualty of this uninspired conflict. No amount of red dot sights or underbarrel grenade launchers could change the fact that war absolutely changes. This is modern warfare, and the rules are very much different now. There is no such thing as a clean conflict anymore. That is what the title Modern Warfare means. The medium of video games seemed obsessed with manufacturing the feeling of combat of warfare. Where so many games create conflict, few wrestle with the implications and mechanics that lead to that conflict in the first place, and the catastrophe that occurs in the moments after your combat. COD 4 does, and I just wish I could say that for the rest of the games in the series. But I'll stop there, and let some of that steep a bit because it is pretty dense. I'm actually going to take a second to say that while I am confident about my analysis of these games, I don't actually have a good idea of how people feel about these games in 2020. I do read every single YouTube comment for my videos, and I think this topic in particular would be interesting for you all to weigh in on. Do you see where I'm coming from on this game? I am interested in hearing what you have to say. Because despite the sort of collegiate, highfalutin analysis nonsense I have to say, it still remains that this is just such an incredible game in its levels and set pieces. God, the boat level at the beginning is just such an incredible tone setter for what you are going to be doing in this game. I can't even feel like I am qualified to say anything about All Gillied Up. A mission so iconic and immersive, I find myself wondering how you would explain this mission to someone who doesn't play video games. We started out this video talking about how people remember COD games differently, and how most people hit some sort of wall that made them less interested in the series. This is the closest game to universal appreciation I can imagine exists in the series, and it was an absolute pleasure to play through again for this video. I cannot say that about all of these games. Funnily enough, I can't say the same for the multiplayer, a mode that I think actually has aged a bit more poorly than you might think. It's here I have to apologize to anyone who might be mad that I am playing the remastered version of the game. This video was extremely expensive to make, and I was actually able to get COD 4 remastered in the edition of Infinite Warfare I got, which saved me some money, so sorry. While its maps remain iconic for their ability to funnel action toward hot zones of action, there are still remnants of the Infinity Ward developers trying to figure out how to make a good Call of Duty multiplayer game. The balance is the main thing. There's just far too many easy choices for weaponry and perks, and the supposed rock, paper, scissors battle they wanted to encourage with Juggernaut and Stopping Power doesn't work nearly as well as I think they intended. Because first off, it makes any other perk choice in that slot useless because the game necessitates at least one. An issue I ran into revisiting the multiplayer is just how inconsistent this rock, paper, scissors game makes each individual gunfight. Because the truth is, you're engaging in 4 different possible engagements at a time. Jug versus Jug, Jug versus Stopping Power versus Jug, or Stopping Power versus Stopping Power. Or I guess the other combinations of perks in that slot I constantly forget exist. It creates inconsistent frags that happen one after another that kind of takes away from what I think is one of the main appeals to a Call of Duty multiplayer match, which is the rhythmic switching from target to target while consistently moving forward. One of the worst engagements you can have in the game is Jug v Jug, especially when every second of combat matters like it does in a Call of Duty game. When you pair this with the ubiquity of the meta guns, you get a sort of match-to-match experience that doesn't allow for much expansion outside the lines. Sure, guns like the M16 and MP5 were stronger than others, but most of the guns were incredibly lethal anyway, a bit of a staple for Infinity Ward games going forward. The maps themselves remain iconic, however. Crash and Vacant, Backlot and Crossfire, While the maps play fine enough, I think that they made such an impact on people due to the iconic moments and unique things each map can bring to the table. When I think of COD 4 maps, I think of specific moments in specific places. Sniping the cross on Crossfire, fighting over the third floor on Crash, hiding in the tall grass on Overgrown. These maps had such a unique character to them that would allow for specific experiences on each map. And where I think that the future games had maps that maybe are more consistent or more properly balanced or designed, with that consistency comes a bit of a sacrifice in character. I think Infinity Ward really had started to figure out how to create emergent moments in their multiplayer matches that felt unique and specific to just you, but they were really a matter of how the maps were designed to encourage those moments. Truth be told, Call of Duty 4, it slaps. It slaps hard, man. It really says something and has identity, something that it shares with the next game in the series, for better or for worse. You might be surprised to hear that I like World at War. Okay, at least like 85% of the time. I'm not so high and mighty to find the violence immoral or unnecessary. I do think more than anything, though, World at War, believe it or not, had a lot of the same artistic objectives that COD 4 did. It just struggles to reach the same thematic mountaintops. Let me explain, because that sounds ridiculous. I think both this game and COD 4 were more or less direct responses to the previous games in the series and their valor-fueled expressions of the Call of Duty. Both of these games deemed it necessary to address the ways in which warfare isn't always as black and white as the previous games made it seem. Where COD 4 does that through politics and mission design, World at War does it through its aesthetics. Like it or not, World at War is one of the most instantly recognizable Call of Duty games, insofar that the blood and the viscera, the gray and the dirt, and the flying body parts set it apart from every Call of Duty game going forward. The aesthetics of World at War are meant to emphasize this idea that war hasn't been properly represented in the series up until this point. In the previous games, when you fired upon someone, they would die with little to no blood emerging from their wounds. As mentioned, that was far from the intention of Call of Duty games. It wasn't concerned with putting you in the war as much as it was showing the parts they considered important at the time. However, for Treyarch, World at War was their real coming out party. The game intended to be a more mature, more gritty, more realistic approach to the conflict in the 1940s. It was also the first Call of Duty game of the series to showcase the Pacific Theater. As many of you know, those two things are no accident. The Pacific Theater was specifically bloody and gruesome, with tactics and wartime rule-breaking that shattered every preconceived notion of how to fight a war previous. This creates what I consider the first of a good amount of philosophical questions that World at War brings up, both inside of the game and outside of it. First being, is this really necessary? The violence and gore, that is. And I think I have an answer to this. Well, an anti-answer, I guess. They don't care if it is or not. That's the answer. Call of Duty World at War has this protective layer of nihilistic teenage angst surrounding it that almost says to the player, this ain't your daddy's World War II game, right at the start of the campaign. It shows right at the beginning, F-words and gore flying, that this was going to be a very different experience from the previous Call of Duties. And I think this has different results for different people. I find that the game succeeds in ways that the series has all but refused to, but also fails in a couple of ways that sour me on a fraction of the game as a whole. For one, the actual construction of the game has hardly changed at all. This is still very much a Call of Duty game, hilariously even in the sense of the nitty-gritty back-end stuff. There are still remnants of the coding that was in the first couple of Call of Duty games, and I even discovered that the audio callouts of the German soldiers actually sound identical to the same ones used in the very first Call of Duty games. It's here that I hilariously expose myself as a dirty, ignorant American, but I feel like I hear the Germans yell, "Sally Tater!" quite frequently, and I know it isn't actually Sally Tater, but that's what it sounds like to me. You can hear the Germans yelling this exactly in the first couple games. Even the set pieces and level design just scream Call of Duty. It's a shame then that the main difference in this game really tends to be aesthetic and thematic, not at all mechanic. There's no real synchronicity in tying this game into its more gritty themes because we are still gunning down the same amount of people in the same laser-accurate way. I even once had Reznov compliment me on a particularly cool no-scope one time. Trust me, it was jarring for me too, given the whole trying to be more realistic thing. The same animations exist, the same models exist, and the overwhelming level of uncharacteristic cheapness really solidifies the fact that Treyarch was still very much the younger sibling over the Call of Duty franchise. They were given the hand-me-downs of what was its more successful older brother and told to make it work. Which is almost even more commendable insofar that the game frequently does work, honestly probably in more ways than it fails. More importantly, it works as a dramatic and thematic foil to the previous game's take on valor and glory and war. War is oftentimes more to do with the muck and the mire than to do with the glory and awards. The sort of whitewashed, bloodless combat of the previous games clearly was an issue to Treyarch. In this game, you're going to be blasting limbs off of German soldiers, burning Japanese soldiers, and gunning down hordes of soldiers into a bloody mist. Does this work for you? It feels like personal preference, but I do think the game comes with some great missions that emphasize the grittier theme more effectively when it is explicitly compared to the first game. Think back to what I think is the most iconic mission in the game, or at least up there. Meeting Viktor Reznov in the bloody-strewn fountain of Soviet Stalingrad is such an obvious message to the player. We have seen these streets before. We have retaken Stalingrad to the rising strings and orchestras, leading us to a glorified, unified victory. Here we are back, just you and one other. No unity, no hordes for Mother Russia, no orchestras. This is the game showing you the sides of these conflicts that the other games had zero interest in showing you. And I guess in that sense, I really am appreciative of these games and their vision toward showing those sides. And while I certainly appreciate the more mechanically metaphorical approach of COD 4, there's something really compelling and interesting about Treyarch's brute force attempt at making it very, very clear that this is a type of Call of Duty that's different. It's for that reason I think that the European front missions are far more interesting and well-designed than the ones that take place in the Pacific. While I think personally I do think that the missions play on questionable stereotypes of the Japanese military, I think it does so in a way that is hardly much different than the ways in which it plays on wartime stereotypes everywhere in history. I don't think that this makes it better or in any way passable, but it does act as a general through line for the sort of scorched earth Call of Duty-ification that both Infinity Ward and Treyarch do to cultures and countries everywhere. Much has been written about the jingoistic American exceptionalism on display in Call of Duty games, or its racism, and while I don't have intentions of thinking I have much novel or anything worth even saying as an American myself, but as off-putting as I find some of the representations of the Japanese in this game, I guess I can only feel comfortable saying it adds to the pile of hordes of Soviet soldiers and possibly tone-deaf action sequences in Brazilian favelas, Viet Cong, jolly-ho British soldiers, and Adidas jumpsuit-donned Russians. One should not forget this in playing COD games, but be aware that if and when you do find the racism on display in these games, that it is a racism fueled by a sort of indiscriminate carelessness. Let's be real. Still racism. Still pretty bad. However, it creates a hilarious irony insofar it cements the final stereotype in its canon, which is that of the culturally ignorant Americans. Okay, to bring it back a bit, because I know how much you all love a good dose of social commentary in your Call of Duty videos, this is why I think I prefer the European front in this game. Because instead of just being stereotypical with no commentary, the game starts off with deconstructing the stereotypes on display about Stalingrad. It juxtaposes this new tone with maybe its most hilariously obtuse stereotype yet, Reznov himself, such a brash and brave Soviet soldier that it is almost endearing in its ridiculousness. World at War also takes on its own version of the storming of the Reichstag, with some pretty similar level design and imagery to the original game. It actually lends a lot of credence to the theory that this game is a sort of direct response to the PG-13 impressions that the first game made. You enter into a lot of similar places, a lot of similar set pieces, but with a certain griminess that juxtaposes the first game. Much has been said about how the ending of this mission compares poorly to the ending of the original game, in that the game makes you, the player, the person who mounts the flag on top of the building at the end, compared to how the first game has you assisting and observing an NPC doing the same thing. And I think where it may appear to easily see this as the player one-ification that the series undeniably employs later on, I think this is an interesting example of a bit of the thematically consistent narrative choices this game can make. Reznov always felt a bit like your version of Virgil, escorting you through the rings of hell of World War II. There was this very weird relationship between you, the player, and him that encouraged this idea of you being even somewhat comparable to some sort of chosen one. He gloats consistently about you, embellishes stories, and adores your bravery. If anything, the Player 1 worship that the Call of Duty games take on is actually thematically and narratively supported in this game, and a really interesting twist on the series' worship of the collective. And it's important to note just how people were beginning to whisper about the derivative nature of these games at this point. And Treyarch knew that if they were headed back into World War II, that they would have to change the formula. Having you hoist the Reichstag above Germany is less about the game posturing toward power fantasy, and more about the game responding to its franchise's overly polished and idealistic beginnings. The blood and the guts can only get you so far in terms of building thematics, but as a rhetoric, a response to the game's previous shortcomings and naivete, Call of Duty World at War kind of succeeds. And for that, I guess I am pretty positive about this game overall. I just wish that A, the Pacific Theater missions were just better designed, especially the very last one, and B, that they were a little more interested or concerned with confronting some of the nuance behind the savagery of the Japanese, not just playing upon stereotypes like they did with the Russian theater in the first Call of Duty game. But for every step the game makes in trying to separate itself from its predecessors, it really fails to do the same thing with its multiplayer mode. Call of Duty World at War's multiplayer mode is a less consistent, poorly balanced version of Modern Warfare's multiplayer success. Rampant MP40s and far too big of maps made World at War's multiplayer a sort of black mark in terms of the arcadey fans' appreciation of Call of Duty games. It wasn't a bad title. It added modes like War that insisted that the player be more objective-minded rather than just frag-minded. And the maps were far too gray and dreary to be remembered in the same ways other iconic maps were. It's hard to say why World at War didn't have the same sort of ubiquitous appeal that COD 4 did. It could be its movement, its underpowered sniper rifles, its more wide and open map design, or even just people being disinterested in another World War II multiplayer game. Again, a lot of people liked this game's multiplayer, but a lot didn't. It's hard to find out why in 2020 due to the game being unplayable because of low population and bots. However, this game is one of the most popular COD games on Steam in 2020. So, why? Well, it isn't because of the multiplayer, and it certainly isn't because of the campaign. World at War's main appeal in 2020 is its Zombies mode, a mode that was originally developed as a fun joke near the end of the campaign, but later developed to become one of the most interesting and frustrating pillars of a Call of Duty game going forward. World at War Zombies is some of the most fun I've had in a Call of Duty game, and I particularly love the map Verrucht, an asylum that has been overrun by undead. We will get far more into this later on, but for me, a Zombies map quality starts and ends with its atmosphere. Gameplay is nice, wonder weapons and perks and bosses are all extremely interesting, but as a casual Zombies fan myself, what hooks me first above all else is if the map itself feels believable and interesting thematically and aesthetically. Verrucht is the closest the Treyarch games get to making a zombie map horrifying, and it works. It is absolutely a difficult map, one that has tension that rises into some of the more memorable last stands of the first game. The simplicity and straightforwardness of its map design has you fulfilling similar tasks each time, but the difficulty and atmosphere makes it so each playthrough is a bite-size enough to not warrant 45 minutes of setting up the map. I generally love the maps on offer in World at War Zombies, with Der Riese probably being the best designed mechanically. I just love Verrucht's atmosphere so much. And in writing this, I feel like I convinced myself into liking this game a bit more than I thought I did. I think I am probably a bit more negative about this game than I let on, but overall positive. I think we do that sometimes as writers. If we love something, we nitpick. If we aren't huge on something, its positives shine a bit brighter. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to legally obtain a copy of World at War Final Fronts. However, I imagine it tried to carry on the darker, more brutal thematic notes. World at War tried to change the course of Call of Duty games going forward, but it would be the next game that solidified the series in a lot of people's minds as being more of a superhero game rather than a game about being cogs in a machine. I won't lie to you, YouTube audience. I won't lie to you. Us writer types want you to think we enter into these projects with an open mind, with no biases or preconceived notions. I went into MW2 expecting to hate it. I loved it. I actually, non-ironically, loved it. I didn't like it. I liked World at War. I loved Modern Warfare 2. It was probably the most fun I had playing a Call of Duty single player, and has probably the widest discrepancy in fun level in its multiplayer. And before I even go into the game itself, I want to make clear some of the reasons I think this game rocked my socks off. The first reason is clear to me immediately. This game is absolutely ridiculous, in the best way possible. It is a snowball of self-indulgent absurdity, cascading down a summit of preposterousness. One cannot understate how disinterested this game is with reality, and it is better for it. When we spoke about how Call of Duty 2 built the foundation for a good Call of Duty mission, it becomes clear why Infinity Ward decided to take its game toward the modern age. There is so much more a developer can do creatively with modern warfare than you are able to accomplish with the military technology of the 1940s. Every step of the 4-part framework that we spoke about can be turned up in intensity for a game about nukes, thermal sights, and heartbeat sensors. Take, for example, one of the game's most memorable sections, the ascent up a Soviet-occupied mountaintop. Everything about this mission could not be possible were it not for the developers drawing every bit of energy from the game's modern setting. Had you heard about a heartbeat sensor before you played Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2? I sure as fiddle-faddle did not. The game gives you the opportunity to both learn about and experience some of the military's most absurd methods of murder. The game also emphasizes one of the other pillars of a good Call of Duty mission we mentioned earlier, insofar that it gives you probably the most diverse campaign we have seen thus far. The same mountain scaling mission has you go from platforming to stealth, wave defense to chase sequence, to literal downhill snowmobiling race sections. Now that I'm writing it out, I'm realizing that this mission, titled Cliffhanger, might actually be one of the best missions in the whole franchise. If you compare it with the 4 elements to a good COD mission, it hits on every single one. The second thing that I love about this game is how it ties together an aesthetic feeling for the Modern Warfare sub-series that I feel like hasn't been able to be recreated since the 3rd game. It's a bit of a struggle to describe. However, I feel that Modern Warfare as a sub-series in particular has a charm and consistent aesthetic that, for me at least, powered a lot of the after-school Xbox Live parties and conversations. My friends and I would constantly be talking about the weapons and gadgets at use and quoting certain parts of the series. For me, I could never stop saying, "What the hell kind of name is soap?" My friends' gamer tags always had 141 in them in memory of the task force. Captain Price has always remained somewhat of a mascot for the Call of Duty franchise that neither the Treyarch games or the Sledgehammer games have managed to recreate. The text and glowing night vision goggle aesthetic is instantly recognizable for anyone who is around video games in this time. The characters, the world, the art, the weapons, and the artistic cohesion of the story all create a consistent universe that is Modern Warfare, in a way that few video games can actually reach. To me, the Modern Warfare games were the Avengers of my formative years. Popcorn entertainment designed to emphasize a universe of characters and thematic motifs. Take, for example, the fact that the games have a consistent through line of cigars being used as a motif. Is this some veiled metaphor about how war burns down a man until nothing remains? Of course not. It's a fun reference that ties together each of the games in a way that perks up my ears and makes me smile. These games relish in themselves, in their absurdity and preposterousness. It was always a fun time to experience and talk with friends before and after school, and while I and many others felt the series fall apart a bit with the 3rd iteration, there is no doubt that we would consume any and all Modern Warfare-related content, as long as we got to see what our friends in Task Force 141 were up to. And if you haven't noticed, I have not cared to talk about plot much at all in any of this video so far. This is not an accident. The first reason is because Call of Duty cares little for its plot, and so neither should Dave. To an extent, this video implies that you will have an understanding about these games. So I should say as the games going forward become even more nonsensical and chaotic with their plots, I won't waste any time trying to parse them out in any logical way. I mean, they certainly don't. The second reason is Call of Duty has never really been about the plot. It's always been about the tonal accomplishments, its aesthetics and thematics. It has always been about the set pieces and explosions. Modern Warfare 2 does well to acknowledge this and leave you, the player, with 86 different guns and a helicopter that runs solely on chaos. Modern Warfare 2 in particular does this best in my opinion, and it's not even really close if you ask me. Remember when we spoke about how the original Modern Warfare was titled as such to be a critical examination of Modern Warfare itself? Modern Warfare is the sort of title that it says what it is. This game is Modern Warfare. It wants to give your little child brain every single idea it could come up with when you read a Wikipedia page on futuristic tech in the military. It is self-indulgently adorable in its commitment to childlike naivete and imagination. This is the height of that Avengers-level self-referential popcorn fun. It is not at all the politically motivated Iraq allegory that the first game was. No, this game is almost certainly caught up in its own fiction. A fiction that has a thread that runs in and around itself so many times that you can't help but spend a couple hours picking at it just to see where it all leads. Unfortunately, all of this is why the game's biggest failure by far is its infamous level No Russian, a completely impotent attempt at shocking the player's parents into free marketing on cable news. In this level, you will be gunning down helpless civilians in an airport. Well, okay, you don't have to gun them down. You can proceed without hitting a single person. Not like the game has anything interesting to say about that choice either. I cannot stress enough how poorly this mission does at accomplishing anything it sets out to do, least of all creating any sort of compelling statements on interactivity or games about war. It's a sophomoric attempt at doing exactly what the first game did, which is to force the player into questioning roles and blame in a global conflict without defined countries or sides. Where the first game absolutely had something to say about how war in the 21st century is unquestionably different than any war previous, Modern Warfare 2 surrounds its most shocking level with absolutely zero, and I mean zero, critical or introspective analysis on the reasons how this shooting came to be and any dream of having you question its complexities. Nope. Instead, they put this mission between you getting in a snowmobile chase down a mountain and a nuclear bomb being purposefully deployed overhead as an EMP device. Oh, and then they made the place a multiplayer map, just to really sell the point here. My point here is this, and it is one that should help inform my entire perspective on these games. A Call of Duty game decides, whether consciously or not, whether it is going to be a game of critical examination like COD 4 or World at War, a game of historical observation like the early games, or if it is going to be a summer blockbuster, like most games after this one. All three of these are fine. Within reason, one can occasionally dip into the pot of the others. However, most major failings of these games come when the game gets temporarily confused with which type of COD game it wants to be, and violently detours into another. It happens here, and it happens later on with Sledgehammer's attempt at a World War II game. Because to bring it back to the positive, when Modern Warfare 2 does decide to stay in its metaphorical lane, boy does it do it well. Outside of No Russian, there really isn't a part of this game that slows down in any meaningful way. It is wall to wall with interesting set pieces and unique combat encounters. I think that at this point it's hard for almost anyone familiar to the series to look at the Call of Duty franchise without years and years of jaded cynicism and disappointment. There have been way too many Call of Duty games iterating on the same thing for far too long. But it's here in Modern Warfare 2 where if you can just somehow bring yourself back to 2009 where you played this for the first time, you will realize that this was such a tremendous leap in the Call of Duty formula. For better or for worse, the bombastic, childlike absurdity that powers most of the games going forward was born and bred here. That is Modern Warfare 2's legacy to me, a game that defines a noticeable chapter break in Call of Duty's long history. Goodbye to the historical observations of military valor and reverence on display in the original games. Hello Ramirez, hello uncritical power fantasy, and hello Burger Town. And it's not enough to just say that Modern Warfare 2 defines the start of the more Hollywood side of Call of Duty's history. One has to begin to think on how it impacted the series specifically. This game sold like crazy, and it is not insane to say that a light bulb may have flickered for the suits over at Activision and Infinity Ward. They may have thought to themselves, buyers love the crazy. Call of Duty was no longer about the Call of Duty. Call of Duty was becoming a self-referential icon, a motif, a name that represents a guarantee to the consumer rather than a potent commentary on wartime valor. That guarantee? Explosions, headshots, camouflages, slow-mo, and a 5-hour or so stroking of your childish dreams of being G.I. Joe. I personally love this about the game. I'm happy with how the previous games handled the Call of Duty, but I can honestly say I'd rather storm the White House under Russian invasion rather than storm the Reichstag even one more time. Even Modern Warfare 2's secondary mode, Spec Ops, is one of my favorite Call of Duty experiences on offer in the catalog. I especially love the co-op missions, of which I played through with my friend Slide Drum. I love these missions because they essentially concentrate and iterate upon those 4 pillars I've mentioned so many times, but do so in a way that you are getting as condensed and effective a gameplay opportunity as possible. These missions are entirely gameplay driven, the best of which give you a couple of different opportunities for progression, such as stealth or action. One mission had me and Slide Drum infiltrating the snowy camp like in the mission mentioned earlier, but this time with a real partner. You know those parts in like every Call of Duty game where you are to take out one soldier while your partner simultaneously shoots the other one? It is a next level of immersive fun when you have to claim and count down your shots with another real player. Buying in is the name of the game for these Spec Ops missions. I cannot recommend enough just letting your childlike wonder open up for these missions and just playing them like you are 10 years old playing cops and robbers in the backyard. Using call signs, saying Roger and over. Using your imagination and whatever other nerdy flares you can bring up makes the Spec Ops modes one of the most joyful Call of Duty experiences out there. And speaking of joy, let's finally talk Modern Warfare 2 multiplayer. All right, quick. What do you think of when I say Modern Warfare 2 multiplayer? Okay, are you done? Because I'm going to take some guesses. Did you think of the pre-match lobbies, screaming into the microphones? Unapologetic racism? Maybe your first thought was quickscoping, the intervention, 1v1 me Rust, Terminal, someone thought of Terminal. Last guess, uninstall, broken controllers, Commando Pro, oh god, the Akimbo Model 1887s, an unquenchable need to play every day despite every session ending with a sinking depression that leaves you questioning why you spend so much time grinding for imaginary camos on an imaginary submachine gun? I imagine some of those or most of those ran through your mind just at the mention of Modern Warfare 2. Modern Warfare 2's multiplayer is absolutely confounding to me in 2020. How did we play this game so much? This game is unforgivable. It's borderline immoral. It is unfathomably frustrating. And no, I don't just suck. I had my fair share of nukes back in my day. I think that it is pretty clear why this game is so frustrating and also so iconic. Infinity Ward decided something very deliberately in this game's multiplayer. When everything is overpowered, nothing is overpowered. The weapons and gadgets on display in this game are so ubiquitously powerful, so astonishingly lethal, that anyone with an eye on you and an angle for engagement might as well be firing Predator missiles at you at 550 RPM. An ACR and MW2 will take you out with such immaculate precision you will be left wondering how someone got an automatic sniper rifle. In Modern Warfare 2, war is hell. The multiplayer will chew you up and spit you out, step on you with a pave load, dig a hole under your body with a Semtex, and pound you into the dirt over and over again with a chopper gunner and AC-130. You remember that Tom Cruise movie where he dies and comes back again endlessly? Edge of Tomorrow? MW2 demands you live this Sisyphean existence with an absolute brutal disregard for your enjoyment level. Sure, sometimes you are the one laying down the pain, but my god is it frustrating to emerge from the womb of the kill cam only to be rained upon by a hellfire of missiles launched by XX Big Booty Destroyer 69XX. But still, Modern Warfare 2 might just hold the most iconic Call of Duty multiplayer mode of the whole franchise, and for that reason, it still holds up as a landmark moment in video game history. I'm not certain if it has anything to do with the gameplay itself being special, as much as it being the right game at the right time. Xbox Live had just started its zenith as a routine meeting place for friends and strangers. Lifelong friendships were forged on High-Rise, and night-long rivalries were created and destroyed on Rust. And despite a lot of the verbal abuse you were subjected to on a daily basis, there is a disheartening melancholy to entering a Modern Warfare 2 lobby in 2020 and hearing absolutely nothing. It's like being in an auditorium or concert hall and hearing silence. Sure, it's no less effective in its purpose, but shockingly vacant, like it's missing a vital organ. There was something captured in MW2 that escaped us since. Wisps exist in future Call of Duty games, sure, but something will always be left with those years back on Terminal. I think that something wasn't just in the game, but somehow connected to us as well, and we lost it alongside the game. Eventually we played that game for the last time ever. Eventually we said, "See you tomorrow, guys," for the last time ever. We thought that the max prestige would mean something. We didn't stop to think that we would one day never launch the game again. What happened with Modern Warfare 2's multiplayer? How did we all universally decide, this is the game to plug my mic in for? This is the game to stand up, lean forward, crank your headset, and yell at my enemies for? How did we decide to all show up and make so many friends? And how do we access that again? I mean, I don't have an answer for you. All I can do is smile while I write this and be happy it happened at all. My experience with the Call of Duty Black Ops series can be weirdly defined as being a tale of 3 modes. There is no sub-series in this franchise more confusing and varied in quality than that of the Black Ops series, and I find parsing out my thoughts on the games difficult when I love so much and dislike so much more. Black Ops, Black Ops 2, and Black Ops 3 have some of my least favorite campaigns in all of the franchise, yet have my most loved multiplayers by a considerable margin. There's little doubt in my mind that Black Ops co-op mode, Zombies, is the best co-op offering in the entire franchise. So what is more important to you? Really, think about that, by the way. It's not rhetorical. What is more important to you when considering the purchase of a Call of Duty game? The reason I pose this question is that the Black Ops games feel more to me like 3 separate products bundled together in one rather than any of the other offerings in the series thus far. There just isn't that degree of consistent homogenization that I spoke about being so critical to the Modern Warfare sub-series' success, and each game is left floundering in a wealth of twisting and turning settings, thematics, and motifs that it just can't find its footing in. The total package of these 3.5 games over the course of almost a decade don't exactly inspire the same sort of consistency that we got from the MWCU. Their multiplayer and co-op modes are far more similar amongst the games mechanically than they are thematically. The multiplayer and zombies modes in particular undergo such dramatic and absurd journeys in terms of thematic objectives that trying to map them out as the same series will leave you with a painful tonal whiplash. I could never really decide what Black Ops wanted to be as a piece of media. Was it playfully conspiratorial? Was it actually conspiratorial? Was it pulp nonsense in the same way Modern Warfare was trying to be, or was it actually trying to be some sort of meta-narrative on warfare? Was the Black Ops series trying to solidify its place in the Call of Duty canon by being different, or were they selling an orange box style product where you could experience 3 different experiences a la carte? I'm not sure I know even after writing this godforsaken video. Black Ops as a series still confuses me. But let's start with focusing in on my favorite of the 3 campaigns on offer here. Call of Duty Black Ops is a game that stands out enough from the Modern Warfare series to both establish Treyarch as an equal pillar in the franchise, but also as an equal worthy of content that can succeed that of Modern Warfare. How can it succeed over Modern Warfare, though? Well, it does so only sometimes, but it does so in character and daring. Black Ops carries alongside the series' most insane and chaotic plot lines a sort of animalistic forward momentum that can only be described as absolutely necessary. Without this story momentum, without this breakneck pace, the holes in the plotline become unignorable bumps along the road. With it, however, the holes just blend into the path as harmlessly insignificant. The worst thing you can do with a Black Ops game is analyze its story. This is not a game to be pored over. This is a game to be gulped, to be ravished. Black Ops demands more suspension of disbelief than maybe any of the other games, especially with its tenuous connections to World at War. You see, Viktor Reznov might just be the best part of this game. Not because he makes any attempt at coherent sense, but because he acts as a microcosm for the Black Ops sub-series as a whole. Is Reznov real? Are the stories of CIA Black Ops missions being told real? Is Reznov an absolute caricature of Soviet stereotypes and pulp nonsense? I mean, isn't that what Black Ops is as a whole? Is Viktor Reznov a real, meaningful attempt at commenting on the results of warfare and torture in a man's mind after years and years of it? Is Reznov an example of exactly the sort of consequences and realities of warfare that I criticized World at War for completely ignoring? Or is he just there for the shock, the bombast, the hilarity, and the heroics? Can't I ask the same thing of these games? Consider what is by far my favorite mission in the first game, Vorkuta, which has you and old Rezi escaping in dramatic fashion from a gulag. Now, I won't be the first in acknowledging that the explicit intent of this mission is to be unreliable and unbelievable. The events of this mission are designed to stoke skepticism in the player, a skepticism that should prevail throughout the entire game, by the way. I also won't bore you with another explanation about this, but this mission absolutely hits all 4 pillars as well. But the mission sows a seed that should sprout and grow throughout the 4 hours or so of runtime of this game. Does that seed grow, or does it fester and die in a pit of cynicism the first steps of the mission? Because after this admittedly incredible Call of Duty mission, if you are still on board with the ridiculous nature of the game, then it might just grow into something special for you. In that way, this mission acts as a sort of weird test or quiz moment to see if this game really is for you going forward. It's sort of like a boss, like the Asylum Demon from Dark Souls. It asks you, are you ready? Is this game really for you? And there's your Dark Souls reference for you stream watchers. Add on to this the fact that you see appearances from figures like John F. Kennedy and real-life locations and events like the Bay of Pigs. And what you're left with is a menagerie of mayhem that I think only appeals to certain people's interests. And it wasn't until the very end of this game where I made my decision on where I fall in this game. And when I say the very end, I mean it. In the ending credits, it is implied via one of the most unintentionally hilarious video game moments of all time that you were somehow involved in the assassination of JFK in Dallas. Was it you? Did you help? Were you the grassy knoll? I will never have any idea. I will also never have any idea why they decided putting PS2-looking Mason in a real-life picture of JFK moments before his death was at all a good idea. I immediately burst out laughing at the absurdity and self-seriousness of the moment. It affected me so much that I instantly was confronted with the fact that I had to reevaluate the entire game I had just played. I had to come to terms with the fact that Black Ops, that Treyarch, seems 100% earnest in their desire to show you that nothing is ever as it seems. Open your eyes, man. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. It's this overwhelming teenager-fueled nihilism that is the underlying ethos of the entire game. And it wasn't until I saw a polygonal Mason standing amongst his very real counterparts that this became abundantly clear to me. Whether or not it is true that the government hides and shadows many devious and extrajudicial actions from the common people, and it most certainly is, by the way, Black Ops decides to pander to the lowest common denominator of conspiracy theorist nonsense. Instead of tackling that governmental inconspicuousness with any meaningful tact, it arrives at it in the same way it arrives at Reznov, which is to say with little subtlety or subtext. Unfortunately, unlike Reznov, it doesn't work here. I enjoyed Black Ops quite a bit for the first 4 hours and 30 minutes. It was unfortunately the last 2 that soured the game a bit for me going forward. Which is a shame because somewhere underneath a lot of this self-seriousness is a game worthy of love and appreciation from old Dave. But as of right now in the series, I'm going to go ahead and stick with my friends over at Task Force 141. Mason is just a little much for me. But Black Ops still remains a high point in the series for me, however, despite the campaign varying from decent to laughably incomprehensible. It remains high in my rankings because of such a stellar improvement to the zombies formula, and a pretty great multiplayer that suffers from a couple near-fatal flaws. Let's start with the zombies, a mode that could easily be argued to be the best of the many zombies iterations throughout the series. Black Ops Zombies was where the mode hit its crucial middle ground between mechanical and level design complexity and replayable simplicity. Where the first maps became dull within a couple of goes, Black Ops 1 Zombies maps give you enough interesting mechanical opportunities to give the mode a happy and healthy life of experimentation and perfecting. Maps like Kino de Toten and Ascension might as well be masterclasses in producing the essential zombies experience of chaotic last stands and carefully deliberated plans. There are clear enough objectives that fulfilling the process of setting up in these maps is never so daunting that it sucks the fun away from just playing the maps themselves. There's an understated simplicity to these maps that, when compared to the overly obtuse and self-congratulatory Easter eggs and item builds in the future maps, makes Black Ops 1 Zombies feel like a gem lost to time in some way. Like the developers are never going to be able to go back to this kind of map due to the demand for bigger and better. Because I don't know, I love these maps, and while I'm pretty bad and a novice at Zombies as a whole, these were some of the maps that didn't make me feel like a giant stupo Dumbo head every time I tried to play them before watching a 50-minute YouTube tutorial. There's something to be said about that, I think. My favorite map on offer here is Ascension, with Call of the Dead in close second. My least favorite maps are Moon and Shangri-La, mainly because they are hard and I suck at zombies. The multiplayer on offer in Black Ops 1, I think, is probably a bit more contentiously appreciated than other multiplayers in the franchise. I love it. I think it masks a decent amount of balance issues with some of the best map design and gunplay in the series. It's funny, while Treyarch was so determined to stand out from Infinity Ward in their campaign design, what they actually did was stand out most in their multiplayer design. A rift begins to emerge here in Call of Duty circles once Black Ops 1 is released. It is made abundantly clear with Black Ops 2. Either you are a Treyarch multiplayer lover or an Infinity Ward multiplayer lover. One always prefers one over the other. I want to save some of this conversation for the Black Ops 2 section, in which I speak about Treyarch's multiplayer ethos with a lot more detail. In short, I love how Black Ops uses its high time to kill for more engaging, longer gunfights and a more arena-based map design. I think this ultimately shifts the game towards being a bit more team-focused, where team shooting and organized objective captures are more effective than in Modern Warfare, where you can die in 2 to 3 bullets. I always loved how the game had such a detailed combat report too, with stats and heat maps telling you where you are most effective on the map and where you decide to mainly shoot your targets. I wish the games didn't move away from that kind of thing moving forward. My only issues can be found in what I chalk up to intentional game design differentiators that ended up hurting the final product more than doing the game any sort of unique favors. One being that it addresses the lethality of Modern Warfare's weapons with a sort of flaccid mediocrity in most of its weapons, with the standout guns outclassing almost everything else. I'm looking at you, FAMAS. Finally, they wanted to de-emphasize aggressive sniping in the game, so they nerfed sniper scope-in times so much it almost makes sniping unfun. Not a fan of the direction there. My favorite maps in Black Ops are Summit, Grid, and Zoo. It wouldn't be long for even my heavily praised baby Modern Warfare to start letting me down too, unfortunately. Because as critical as I was here, Black Ops 1 is going to be the last Call of Duty campaign I can say I genuinely enjoyed for quite a long time. The launch trailer for Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 was released on the 21st of October, labeling the game as the most anticipated video game in history. I'm not totally sure they're wrong, actually, with maybe Halo 3 or Grand Theft Auto 5 in close pursuit. At this point in the franchise, it is absolutely mandatory that we establish the fact that Call of Duty is a popular cultural icon at this point, an annual monolith of industry dominance, consistently charting the top spot on every sales board every year. Call of Duty, and Modern Warfare in particular, is one of the biggest entertainment franchises in history at this point, certainly in terms of money. With that, however, comes a not insignificant amount of pressures and stipulations that absolutely influence the finished product as a piece of media and art. Was the game poured over boardroom after boardroom of suits at Activision HQ to produce a product rather than an art? It certainly feels that way. Modern Warfare 3 is by far the least interesting and most soulless title to arrive in the canon so far. Even games I preferred playing less than Modern Warfare 3, like Big Red 1 and World at War, have spirit and identity that at the very least emphasize an artistic intent that allows the player to get an idea of what the game is trying to say about its subject matter. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 feels as polished, as mechanically focused and visually stunning as any Call of Duty up until this point. So why do most Call of Duty fans find it disappointing? Why do I insist that it's one of the worst Call of Duties to date? To answer that, I unfortunately have to revisit the Marvel comparison here for a bit. It isn't controversial to say that I generally really love the Marvel superhero movies that have come out recently, especially the really excellent ones. It also isn't too controversial to say that these games carry ubiquitous similarities, a sort of framework that scaffolds the visual and narrative design of each movie. Some of the least appreciated Marvel movies are normally the ones that are most affected by this, the ones that feel most generic in their design, like a boardroom of writers are just filling in proper nouns into a narrative ad-lib. If we acknowledge that the Modern Warfare series is excellent in the same ways of visual and narrative coherence like the Marvel movies are, we also have to acknowledge that the same sort of opportunities for soulless, profit-prioritizing ubiquity exist as well. Unfortunately for Call of Duty, this is the first time that has really reared its ugly head. Modern Warfare 3 fails to exceed its predecessors in any way other than bombast, at which it often fails as well. It is running short on locales, running low on world monuments to blow up. Everything about this game feels like a profiteering response to Modern Warfare 2, as if to say, you've seen Modern Warfare, but have you seen Moderner Warfare? As far as the single-player campaign goes, the game feels like it has to reiterate on everything that made Modern Warfare 2 so popular and appreciated. Vehicle chase sequences, gunning down random militias in destitute, unfortunate countries, fighting around iconic world monuments, some obtusely violent moment to get the moms all worked up at parent-teacher conference meetings. All of that. It is a polished, relatively fun, creatively bankrupt product, and the series doesn't recover from it for a long time. My main issue with the game stems from a problem of soul and character, not plot. Modern Warfare 3 may very well have the most nonsensical plot structure and beats of any Call of Duty to this point, at least until the next game, that is. But even that has never been enough to truly bother me. I've heard people complain about the fact that Yuri is a character retconned into the series seemingly without concern. The entire Russian invasion into the United States, a huge focus of the second game, is wrapped up within an hour of the game starting. I don't even care that the Russian army invades Paris for whatever reason. None of this has really bothered me because none of it was ever compelling enough, and the games have always been carried by the ferocity and beauty of their set piece and art design. I'm bothered because each game so far has, even when they failed, tried something new in terms of their stance on warfare, politics, bloodshed, or even video games. Modern Warfare 3 is the first game in the series that refuses to try anything new in that department, creating another version of Modern Warfare 2's absurd action roller coaster, without any of the charm or novelty that accompanied that game. It's a darn shame, too, as I grew to love the Modern Warfare sub-series more than I ever have during my replaying of the whole series for this video. And while this section of the video may appear to be lacking in content, it has far more to do with me than it does the game. I have never been one to write criticisms in my videos. I far prefer to celebrate a game's triumphs than decry their failures. It's why I've been almost overwhelmingly positive about the series until this point. MW3 is my tipping point, however. I find so little about this game enjoyable in terms of what I normally find enjoyable about these games. I wanted to know what happened to Price's gang. I wanted to know how they were going to escape being fugitives. But that's all that mattered to me going forward. In this game, I was never interested in anything but what happened to the characters that made me fall in love in a previous game. Is that a good sign? It can't be, that one of the only things worthwhile about a game is the results of the previous games in the series. I was sad to see Soap die so unceremoniously on a table. I was sad to see Price light his cigar at the end of their Odyssey, a tobacco-filled motif that stood for something in the context of the series. I was sad knowing Price had to dig 2 graves on his quest for revenge, not for him in Makarov, but for his best friend in Makarov. I was sad knowing Price was never going to quite recover from all that happened in these games. He, like myself, was probably wishing things could have gone a little bit different in this game. He, like myself, might have been asking, what the hell kind of game is Modern Warfare 3? So Dave, maybe the co-op modes or multiplayer can swing the game for you. Nope. Not only is this the worst co-op experience added in since the series began adding them, but this is also the worst multiplayer since World at War, and maybe my personal least favorite of them all. Modern Warfare 3 takes all of the parts of Modern Warfare 2's multiplayer that I mentioned finding infuriating, the lethality of the weapons, the emphasis on head glitching and camping, the oppressive kill streaks, the drab and absolutely chaotic map design. It's a complete cornucopia of misery, in my opinion, and was one of the only games growing up I never completed a prestige on. I mean, I completed a prestige on the newest game, man, and I'm like 26 with a wife and a job now. It isn't hard to get me to play a Call of Duty game. If I had a ranking for these games, and I don't at this point of the script, Modern Warfare 3 would be very near the bottom. It is the worst of what the Call of Duty series has to offer. Nothing to do with the literal Call of Duty, nothing to do with nuance, nothing to do with originality, and everything to do with derivative, obtuse junk. It is a confirmation to the critics who say Call of Duty is the same game every year, that Call of Duty is lowbrow American exceptionalism. It isn't the worst game the franchise has on offer. Please take your guesses on which is, it's still coming up. But it is shockingly bad. And frankly, I don't wish to talk about it anymore. Call of Duty Black Ops 2 is my single most played Call of Duty game by such a large margin that I would feel comfortable saying it might just be my most played video game of all time. Although Counter-Strike might have a disagreement. I want to be very clear going forward in this particular analysis. Call of Duty Black Ops 2 is far and away my favorite multiplayer Call of Duty to be released, and will probably remain so for a long, long time. I definitely get the feeling that this video has trended toward being far more about the single-player modes and their artistic objectives, and while I'm happy with that, I want to take this particular section to really go into what I think makes a good multiplayer mode, and how Black Ops 2 succeeds as an anomaly against the rest of the series. If you're really interested in Black Ops 2's story, I'm sorry if this is disappointing. I want to talk a little bit about what I think the Black Ops storyline does well before we get too deep into the multiplayer mode. Because as a general rule, I don't really like Black Ops 2's campaign. I think it is relatively positionless in what it is trying to say about the machinification of warfare, and it comes off as wanting to tell a melodramatic war story with an absolutely absurd and incomprehensible set of postmodern time jumps. At this point, you might be thinking to yourself, man, there are a lot of villains in these games whose main motivation is a hatred of America. And you would be right, that's true. It really gets at the half-step, almost there approach a lot of these games have that make them so frustrating. They appear to be self-aware, politically fueled critiques on American imperialism and military might, but so often they come short of actually making any point about it. Besides COD 4, that is. Ultimately, it is a game that has you considering the ethical and logistical cost of warfare fueled by machines, all the while having you play through scenes like this. Call of Duty Black Ops 2 continues the trend of these games developing identities for themselves, not through interesting or meaningful stories or statements, but through aesthetic design and imagery. Black Ops 2 rests its entire identity on this techno-infused quasi-future brutality, and not much else. It's hard to write about a game like this without going into such enormous lengths to try and explain its plot. A plot that is told to you from a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy. Unreliable narrators and mind control are already two very difficult plot structures to include into a story, and when you add the modularity of a video game player, it becomes almost impossible to craft a narrative worth putting the time and energy into trying to understand. I am not lying to you when I say I am still, to this day, unsure of everything that happens in Black Ops 2 single player. It's a fever dream of dubstep and robots, a dream I couldn't wait to wake up from. I do appreciate the attempts at changing the formula though, like how this is the first Call of Duty story mode that has the ability to be changed based on your actions in the missions. Again, I like the idea, it's almost there, but the execution is oftentimes not made clear or just obtuse. The point is, I think, to encourage replayability in the campaign, as I'm sure the numbers were saying that players would play the campaign and then never revisit again. They even added side content in, for what it's worth, as well as a loadout system similar to that of multiplayer. I think it's clear that the people developing single player were starting to realize just how insignificant Call of Duty single player was becoming. And while I think their attempts at change are just that, attempts, it does show a willingness to change and look toward improvement. I feel similarly about the Zombies mode, which has a lot of effort and intricacy with little payoff. I think that Black Ops 2 is probably the division point for a lot of Zombies fans, and I say that with little to no knowledge about the Zombies community's opinion on these games. The maps start developing into twisting caverns of confusion and oftentimes cannot be fully experienced without the help of a YouTuber, a couple of hours of free time, and infinite patience. Which is weird because Black Ops 2 houses my very favorite Zombies map of all the Zombies iterations, Mob of the Dead. This map, without a single shadow of a doubt, slaps. It absolutely nails every core ideal I want in a zombies map, with its atmosphere being the most enjoyable to me. Zombies as an idea absolutely gets away from its horror elements and themes for a more science fiction driven art design, but Mob of the Dead forgoes that progression and instead roots itself in a debilitating grime, an absolutely soul-sucking bloody film that covers the entire map from front to back. This map feels like it could be an Xbox One or PS4 generation map in its attention to detail and fidelity. More than anything, though, the map isn't so hard that it's impossible to play for me, a casual zombies player. This was the only Black Ops 2 map where I was able to complete some sort of objective without having to look something up. I found the parts, did the task to gather them, placed them on the plane, and went to the Golden Gate Bridge, all from exploring the map and using the contextual clues on my own. This may sound funny to you zombies veterans, but I had no idea how to do any of these tasks on these maps, and it went a long way for me in my enjoyment of the map for it to be clear and interesting enough for me to figure out on my own. Now that I think about it, Mob of the Dead, Buried, and Origins are all pretty incredible zombies experiences in terms of atmosphere and creativity. And ultimately, that's what I love about this mode, when they go forward and say, fuck it, let's have you fight zombies in Alcatraz, or hey, get this. What if there were zombies, but you're in the trenches of World War I, and there are giant German automatons walking around? Oh, and wizards. You gotta have wizards. Basically, if the creative team isn't blasted on reefer while creating these maps, I don't want to play them. Zombies is a great thematic foil to the obsessively self-serious and painfully overdramatic story beats of the single-player modes, especially for Treyarch games. So, what are you looking for in a Call of Duty multiplayer game? Are you looking for a casual experience, a competitive experience, a fun time with friends, or a disposable waste of 30 or so minutes every night? Are you into unlocking the camos, watching the tournaments maybe? Do you only play the hardcore mode? Maybe you love Search and Destroy but can't play any of the Respawn game modes. With the sheer amount of multiplayer experience that are on offer on Call of Duty nowadays, I feel it necessary to establish my preferences going forward because, to a degree, Call of Duty multiplayer is relatively subjective. So here is what I like in a Call of Duty multiplayer. I know, nobody asked. I like a longer time to kill in my multiplayer. I think 3 to 4 bullets to kill with an assault rifle is much better than 2 to 3. I think submachine gun should be 4 to 5 or even 6. I like maps that are developed with gameplay more in mind than aesthetics. Maps should be consistent and should be developed around a 3-lane philosophy, but within reason. I like when my Call of Duty games have higher dexterity movement options, which is to say that I should be able to aim down sights faster, shoot out of sprint faster, and be able to move my character more smoothly with jump shots and airstrafes rather than jerky animations or drop shotting. I like my Call of Duty game to have a ranked playlist, and well-designed team-based respawn modes like Hardpoint. Finally, I like my Call of Duty games to have consistent and manipulatable spawns, even if it means they're more rigorously enforced. The concise way to say this is I much prefer my Call of Duty multiplayer games to be created with an arcade sensibility rather than trying to be more realistically focused. I much prefer gunfights to be more focused on accuracy and positioning over time rather than who saw who first. The weapons in Black Ops 2 are much, much less lethal than their Modern Warfare counterparts, and their recoil is a little less forgiving as well. What this does, added upon the higher time to kill, is give gunfights an opportunity to be won and lost on a larger amount of variables, where quicker time to kill games usually come down to less factors due to how quickly the engagement ends. And look, I get why you might like that more. It probably encourages more careful, slower-paced play that rewards positioning over raw gun skill. However, I found that longer engagements in Black Ops 2 allow for not only a higher skill ceiling, but a much less stagnant set of players in a lobby. If sitting on a head glitch and camping spawns doesn't 100% guarantee you a kill like it might in Infinity Ward titles, then players will be much more likely to get creative in the ways they approach their engagements. What you end up with is a lot more jumping around corners, peeking up and down around cover, and opportunities for 180-degree decimations that ultimately encourage a much faster-paced and arena-style gameplay. The maps emphasize this sort of raw skill priority as well, giving as little camping opportunities and dead-end windows to hold up as possible. Black Ops 2's maps were the first to really commit to the 3-lane map design, a design that would see itself run into the ground going forward into the series. A middle lane, usually with 2 power positions on either end, and simple flanking routes with minimal hiding spots around the periphery of the map. Just think of almost any map in Black Ops 2. Standoff has the middle courtyard with the playground side and the alleyway flanking it. Hijacked is practically Nuketown with the 2 opposing buildings in mid-area. Raid is the same way, with a middle courtyard with a poolside and a ringside on its left and right. What this means is there is a consistent opportunity for sides to appear, which ultimately makes spawning way easier on the algorithm because it can clearly decide ownership of which team owns which side of the map. The more arcade focus also gave way to the real explosion of Call of Duty esports, something that is its own legitimate franchise league right now. COD esports existed prior to Black Ops 2, but it was Black Ops 2, and specifically Optic Gaming, that sent MLG COD tournaments into the next level of popularity. So many of my weekends were spent watching match after match, from the incredible last game of Farico Impact's miraculous champs victory, to the incredibly disappointing Search and Destroy collapse at Full Sail University. I watched them all live, cheering alongside my now wife. One of my favorite memories was when pro player Karma and other pros took on a renowned pub-stomping team in a competitive game of Hardpoint. That team was convinced that they could take on the pros because, well, being good at Call of Duty is being good at Call of Duty. The match ended in an embarrassing blowout, with Karma just spinning around in his desk chair with minutes left in the game because his team didn't need him. I will never ever forget the summer of 2013, the same summer I graduated high school and the first summer of me and my now wife being in love. I will never ever forget being excited to watch every ounce of content that came out of the Optic Gaming house with Merc, Big Timer, Scump, and Nadeshot. I watched their live streams, their videos, their tournaments. I became crazy like a girl in the 60s for the Beatles, for a bunch of teenagers in a gaming house by themselves sleeping on air mattresses and playing a video game all day. Call of Duty was starting to become way more about the game this year. It had already and was continuing to explode on YouTube and Twitch. It was a cultural icon at this point, and Black Ops 2 sold its position as an icon so well. When you talk about Call of Duty in a retrospective, you have to acknowledge this. For people my age, Call of Duty was institutional. It was a language of social status, of competition, of passion. Every lunchroom had conversations about which gun was most OP, who got diamond camo first, who hit the sickest YY fakey ladder stall last night. Every text was, yo, did you catch Pamaj's new Catalyst montage? Or did you see Scump left Optic to go to Envy? Understanding Call of Duty as a franchise is understanding that it existed outside of the series itself. It was, without a doubt, a moment in history for a lot of people of a lot of ages. I am confident that I will go to my retirement home and be able to ask someone what their favorite sniper in Black Ops 2 was. I'm confident they will reply immediately by saying, the Ballista. My point with all this nerdiness is, Black Ops 2 took Call of Duty to a level that I love. A real competitive-minded experience that also has an incredible public match experience, with great kill streaks and great maps. I will never, ever forget Black Ops 2 multiplayer, and I will weirdly always remember 2012 and 2013 as the Black Ops 2 years, considering just about all I did was grind league play matches with my best friends. Masters, by the way. Oh boy. Call of Duty Ghosts. I guess I had to write this section eventually. Look, I'm going to speak for a lot of Call of Duty fans when I say this was the game that finally cut a lot of fans off from the series. This game was disappointing for a lot of people, and while there is certainly fans of the game, I have to say that I am not one of those people. Ghosts is a genuinely unenjoyable Call of Duty campaign, especially with the perspective of playing all of these games in a row. Aesthetically, it might be the worst looking Call of Duty. It is painfully drab, unenthusiastically monochromatic, and offensively unoriginal. I mean, guys and gals, this game is not good. This is not a good Call of Duty single player, and maybe its most offensively bad aspect is that it was first and foremost fails as a Call of Duty video game, as interactive software. The level design and mission design suffers the most in this game, with some of the most incomprehensibly boring missions, like this one where you pilot a helicopter toward an enemy position. I cannot believe that this mission made it into the game. It's an all too long vehicle sequence that rivals even the worst vehicle sequences of the classic COD games. It puts you boots on the ground for a couple minutes only to send you right back up and have the mission end. Missions in this game regress to previous Call of Duty games in such painful ways, with turret section after turret section with chest-high cover-filled rooms and spawning bad guys. Ignoring the dog missions and a kind of obtuse but admittedly very enjoyable space mission, I'm not completely sure I remember a single moment or shtick in any of these levels, a critical part of the Call of Duty formula as we spoke about earlier. To this point, most Call of Duty games can forfeit praise in what they are saying or their narratives because their gameplay has been so solid and polished. They can reasonably afford to have lackluster stories and still sell copies because of how many kinesthetically pleasing gameplay opportunities there are. Call of Duty Ghosts denies anyone the opportunity to praise it at all, insisting upon being mediocre to straight up unplayable in every way. Visually, the game comes off as a tech demo more than an interesting take on post-apocalyptia. It has that annoying, beautiful destruction aesthetic that Gears of War popularized in 2006. The urban grays and absolutely personalityless browns are such a relic of the last generation, so much so that the game feels like it's in some sort of visual arrested development. The violence on display in this game is also completely indulgent without commentary, let alone criticism. Even with what I've said about the Black Ops games, they treated their violence with a healthy side of cynicism and teenage nihilism, as if to encourage the player to think about the meaninglessness of it. Ghosts is neither critical nor affectionate of its violence. It is completely disconnected from it, displaying it only as trashy wrapping paper as opposed to any sort of meaningful rhetoric. I want to celebrate these games in this video, I really, really do. Ghosts maybe is the most difficult to celebrate for me because of how it refuses to acknowledge any of the things I appreciate about a Call of Duty game. It is, like Black Ops 2, completely positionless, saying nothing about warfare or violence, and certainly nothing about the literal Call of Duty. Because essentially the Ghosts are the most awesome, the most unbelievably unstoppable soldiers on the planet. They are jacked, and not only that, but they wear the freshest clothes, eat at the chillest restaurants, and hang out with the hottest dudes. In Call of Duty Ghosts, you are a superhero. It's not even up for debate at this point. The opening cinematic basically confirms it. The game basically postures these men as the Spartans at the Battle of Thermopylae in the beginning of the game. It has you thinking that the Ghosts are something otherworldly. It wants you to believe it. But I couldn't. I couldn't stop asking questions the entire playthrough. Is it possible for men to be so elite, so powerful, so much better than everyone else in war? War seems so random, so inhuman, so unbiased. It's a complete reversal of the very ethos of the Call of Duty games we first spoke about, where anyone could die, anyone could run into a room and check left when the enemy was right. Is there any room in real war, with real bullets and real death, for someone to be practically impervious? What is that saying about the actual role of soldiers, of heroes on a front line? It's why I think this game is actually unironically offensive. Like, actually offensive. Actually offensive to those who have served, suffered, and died in the military. I have a lot of patience for these games, but this one took it way too far for me, at least insofar in how it so distantly strays from the core philosophy of the series' origins. My friends and family who have served in the military were ordinary men and women who felt compelled to serve voluntarily. They were not elite people. They were not superheroes. They were heroes on the basis of their normality. By having you play as and alongside these ghosts, it completely ignores the real subtext of what a war game should strive to be, about sacrifice and valor, about participating as an individual towards a collective cause. What sacrifice is there to make when you and your buddies aren't even regarded as human? When they are so preposterously skilled they aren't even putting anything on the line? What sacrifice is there when you can't die? So, okay, maybe they are subverting the expectations of this earnest idea of valor and the Call of Duty. Well, they suck at doing that too. I think the biggest offense of Call of Duty Ghosts is in how it positions itself to be a subversion of Call of Duty's tropes of player empowerment and American exceptionalism, but proceeds to confirm each and every one of those stereotypes regardless. In Ghosts, America is losing the war. You are absolutely in danger of annihilation. You are hit with strikes so devastating it practically begins an apocalypse in America. The game wants you to feel your back's against the wall, but the game never once manifests this in its levels or game design, or its narrative. You are consistently winning in this game. You are always pushing forward, always dominating. Ghosts misses a crucially important opportunity here to be the anti-COD game. It could have told a story that played off the ridiculousness of the Treyarch games, and could have even been a cool message from Infinity Ward that says, hey, you remember how Modern Warfare 3 kind of went off the rails and you didn't like it as much? Here, we listened. Try this. But instead what happens is they created a Modern Warfare 2 fanfiction, a bastardization of every rhythm and beat of what they thought was the golden ticket towards selling a lot of copies. They just didn't succeed in telling a Call of Duty story. They didn't succeed in subverting a Call of Duty story. And they never succeeded in telling a called to duty story. But strangely enough, Ghost would surprise me and a lot of other people by including a co-op mode titled Extinction. Extinction mode, by all accounts, was looking to be another instance of derivative development by Infinity Ward, trying to catch in on the absolutely absurd popularity of the Black Ops Zombies mode. What resulted was an actually kind of novel experience that, without being too critical again, overstayed its welcome a bit on the macro and micro scale. What I mean to say is that Extinction mode is a good mode that, much like you could say about COD as a whole, keeps going for far longer than it really has any need to. It is an enjoyable romp through decently designed levels that have you stopping and popping for a lot of fast reaction, quick thinking action. There are just far too many drill sites and far too long of a time to drill them. In the macro sense, the maps also overstay their welcome by being absolutely absurd by the end of the in-universe story. A story that is so abominably dreadful I can't even believe that it isn't presented tongue-in-cheek. So yeah, nothing can be pure with Ghosts, I guess. Even a co-op mode I really truly enjoyed. Even that has to go on for far too long. It's here I guess I'm going to bring us back to the very beginning of this video. Do you remember that? Oh, so long ago? Shout out to you, by the way, if you've made it this far. I had mentioned how everyone had a moment in the COD series where things just began to fall downward a little bit, where our love didn't go away for the series, but it began to fade. I think for a lot of people, this could have happened anywhere between Modern Warfare 3 and Black Ops 2. I would get that, really, I would. Personally, however, that moment for me is Call of Duty Ghosts, for a couple of reasons. The first is that I was confronted with the undeniable derivative nature of the game. As someone who has played each and every one of these games up until this point, this was really just the one that broke me. Especially that ending, my god, in a long legacy of nonsensical and astonishingly pulpy endings, Ghost carries far and away the most embarrassingly incomprehensible series of events. When I said, where is the sacrifice when someone is incapable of dying? I wasn't kidding. The members of Ghost casts are incapable of dying, from Riley to Hesh and Logan, to the ever-memorable Rourke. The only impossible feat in this game is mortality. But the second reason this was the beginning of the downfall of my love of Call of Duty is a bit more dastardly, a bit more messy, a bit more sad. Ghosts was the transition title from the Xbox 360 generation and the Xbox One generation. This was the game that would launch Call of Duty into the next generation. All the tournaments were to eventually move, all the exclusivities, and all the best graphics and gameplay. I was playing Ghosts daily with my friends I still play games with to this very day. We took the game very seriously, would play game battles matches every night, and stay up until 2 in the morning working on search and destroy nade spots. In that sense, COD Ghosts is incredibly heartwarming and memorable. But unfortunately, I saved up with Alethea to get an Xbox One that year. Unfortunately, my friends were never going to get that console. Unfortunately, I wanted to keep playing. I wanted to grind, to compete, to stream. I was streaming at this time and making it work for myself. I was 19 or so. I wanted to get bigger on Twitch. I wanted to join Optic. I wanted to make it big and compete on a main stage. I can find an old Instagram post from the night the game came out of me saying, "This is the year I go pro." Naive now, I guess, but I believed it at the time. And just like I believe I can make this YouTube channel work, I believed I could make Call of Duty work for me. What I guess I didn't realize is that the relationships you build playing Call of Duty is where a lot of the enjoyment comes from after playing it for over a decade at this point. It isn't wrong to say that Call of Duty's enjoyment became about the friendships we made along the way. This game marked a pivotal break in my years as a Call of Duty fan, as if there was a pre-Ghosts and post-Ghosts timeline. Ghosts is when my gaming squad and I departed for different consoles. At the time, it broke my heart. I never went pro, I never joined Optic, and I eventually quit streaming on that account. What did happen, however, is DerpLOL, Touchy Bunny 1453, and D-Zorn were all able to reunite in the wonderful world of PC gaming. What came next was college, 1,500 hours of Counter-Strike, and a whole lot of virginity. Totally kidding about one of those. It's strange, then, that it broke my heart so much if I didn't even like the game, right? Well, Ghosts is one of the rare multiplayer COD games that was actually awesome in terms of competitive, but sucked in terms of public casual matches. Search and Destroy in this game was an absolute blast. I had a ton of fun playing game battles in this game, and found that I actually got pretty darn nasty at this game. It was probably the best I ever got at a COD game, at least in terms of competitive play. My favorite maps were Warhawk for Search and Destroy, Octane for Domination, and Freight for Blitz. It was a flawed multiplayer experience, with shoddy attempts at balancing guns like the Vector and poor sniping dexterity in the game. But it was an experience that I was at the height of my COD multiplayer life. Looking back, I yelled so much about this game. I yelled about the spawns, I yelled at my teammates when they didn't watch flank, I yelled at my best friends for not calling out. I want to say it was all for nothing, that I shouldn't have done it, but at the same time, I believed. During Call of Duty Ghosts, I believed that I could be a streamer, a pro player, a competitor. I really, truly 100% thought I had the skill and ability. I mean, yeah, I was probably delusional, but honestly, screw that way of thinking. I miss that belief about myself and something I wanted so bad. I want it back. Can we talk a little bit more about the title Call of Duty? I know it seems a little bit late to be getting into pretty foundational things like the title of the franchise in question, especially with how many games we have covered up until this point in the video. We've yet to cover a game developed by Sledgehammer Games, though, a newcomer to the COD series who is very much interested in shifting things up both thematically and mechanically. But first, Call of Duty. I think it should be pretty clear by this point that the title is much more of an iconography than it is any sort of meaningful commentary on military service. It is a signpost, a message to the consumer of what they can hope to receive when they give the GameSpot teenager $60 that November. I can expect my friends to have also purchased this game, to get a 6 or so hour campaign, and for it to have great graphics and first-person shooter gunplay. It really isn't very complicated. Call of Duty is as much a marketing title as it is a rhetorical one, and that isn't inherently bad. This is overall a good thing for the franchise and contributes to that sort of consistency that you can expect from a series like COD. Unfortunately, what it does mean is for franchise veterans and old-timers like myself, there's a fundamentally important part of the COD experience that just doesn't exist anymore. The showcasing and celebration of ordinary men and women, the powerful display of combined might through individual heroism, the historical observational window that was on offer in the first couple of games we covered. I miss that. After nearly a decade at this point without it in the series, I miss it. Well, I did miss it, because Sledgehammer Games' Advanced Warfare looks to address a lot of these concerns with the franchise, all while making the phrase Call of Duty be a front-facing thematic question at the core of their game. I have a strange bit of theorizing about the Sledgehammer Games that, while I guess I'll never know if it's 100% true or not, helps phrase out a lot of my opinions about the developer and their Call of Duty games. Alright, here it is. Sledgehammer helped with Call of Duties in the past, but wasn't given their own game until Advanced Warfare. When I play these games and think about them critically, all I see is a game written from the perspective of a long-time Call of Duty fan. This is to say that AW feels like a direct response to the rhythms, peaks, and valleys of the series to this date, a game that intends to both critique and harken back to a lot of the thematic objectives that the older games tread upon. In that sense, it is a self-referential meta-commentary on Call of Duty itself, a meta-commentary that could have only been written and designed by a group of people who gave a crap about the series to begin with. I mean, this sounds great on paper, right? Who else would you want developing the next iteration of your favorite franchise but the folks who love that franchise the same way you do? Unfortunately, a lot like the series itself, it works and works until it doesn't. Thematically, Advanced Warfare looks to uncover the root of military service, why we do it, why someone might want to do it in the 21st century, and why it isn't just about the killing. When you play as soldiers in Call of Duty 2, there was never the assumption that you were playing as someone who enlisted because they were superhuman freaks of nature like that in Ghosts. It was usually made explicitly clear that you are here in Stalingrad and Normandy because you had to be. ethically, morally, or sometimes even by something like a draft. The men and women the first games valorized weren't there because they wanted to kill a bunch of people, or even that they were particularly good at it. They were there because they were called. So what Advanced Warfare really wants to uncover, I think, is, yes, what is the Call of Duty? But more importantly, when the Call of Duty arrives, who is it that it's calling particularly? Advanced Warfare is much, much more optimistic and much less skeptical of the United States military and its practices than Call of Duty 4. Where COD 4 was concerned with the ways in which Western military might has advanced in such a way that encourages extraneous bullying and interference, AW seems to think the same can be said about the emergence of private corporations. Advanced Warfare posits, not explicitly but through its story, that a military that represents a private interest is becoming more and more dangerous as we advance into the future. It acts as a bit of a cautionary tale in the same way that we discussed how the Borderlands games do, and how the ways in which late-stage capitalism will inevitably lead toward the commodification of bloodshed. Kevin Spacey's character has a vested interest in the ejection of bullets from rifles. Bullets sold by him and rifles sold by him. His character should be instantly recognizable as a villain in the game, if not by his ominous and foreboding introductions and demeanor, then by the fact that he literally pays to manufacture weapons, and he gets paid when people need them. Irons being a villain isn't supposed to be a twist, because Advanced Warfare is distinctly skeptical of anyone who would insist on profiting off of warfare. It is saying that anyone who confuses service and valor with self-interested profiteering is inherently bad. I don't even think this means it is harmfully pro-military either. It is, for better or for worse, dreaming about the ways in which militaries act in the best interest of the people that they serve, not the people that control said militaries. A naive interpretation, sure, but an endearingly aspirational one. Your playable character, Jack Mitchell, voice acted and mocapped by Joel from The Last of Us, is the very embodiment of that endearingly aspirational soldier. He is a Marine, and a damn good one too, and enlisted on his own with his best friend. That best friend is Will Irons, Jonathan's son, who dies tragically in South Korea as the United States is protecting its allies from invasion. The reason I insist that this game wants to hit on all the same notes that a classic Call of Duty game can, all be found in the first part of the game. Unironic military exceptionalism, hoorahs and gun-cocking alike. The United States putting boots on the ground in a foreign country in order to protect its allies. The mission ending with a noble sacrifice without fear in the face of danger. There is volunteerism, bravery, and sacrifice in abundance in the first 25 minutes of this game. Of course, nothing can stay pure because Jonathan Irons offers Jack a second chance at military valor after he loses his arm in the war. A quote-unquote second chance at military valor should be the first red flag of a man like Irons, who is taking advantage of Jack's willingness to serve and profiting off of it. Mitchell even says at one point in the game, "I've known of good men who fought for the wrong causes." You see, Sledgehammer isn't saying that the people fighting in wars are always wrong. They are saying that oftentimes the people at the top contributing to the war's beginnings are the ones worthy of criticism. As the plot goes through its normal Call of Duty paces, you get to see a lot of the house of cards begin to fall for old Mr. Jonathan Irons. In what has to be the most technically impressive Call of Duty game up until this point, Irons begins his massively insane idea of basically just blowing shit up. It always has to happen this way, doesn't it? No matter what the intricacy of the plot or the aspirations of its themes, we are always going to be blowing up internationally renowned monuments. This time on Call of Duty, the Golden Gate Bridge. Ultimately, Irons begins to win, but not before Mr. Spacey begins his maniacal villain monologuing in which he says to the player that he will spare them because he still has some level of humanity left inside of himself. He says that he was just saving the world from itself. And Gideon accurately and effectively responds that many twisted people throughout history have used the exact same argument. And in a moment of heavy-handed poetic justice, Jonathan Irons is cast into the fires of his own creation by none other than another one of his own creations, Jack's mechanical arm that he made to recruit him in the first place. And Gideon was right, you know. Twisted people have used that logic. I mean, they still do. It's what separates Advanced Warfare a bit from the Call of Duties that preceded it. It is a distinctly moral tale, a cautionary look at something, a genuine attempt at taking a stance that acts in stark contrast to the positionless aloofness and teenage dismissiveness that permeates throughout the edgier Call of Duty games. Advanced Warfare is closest to Modern Warfare in almost every single way possible. more so than even Modern Warfare 2. Jonathan Irons even mentions how he grew up seeing the failures of our response in Iraq, and how he wishes to address them. This game is very much answering the same call of Call of Duty 4. I don't think it's an accident that it is titled so similarly. I don't think I'm crazy in saying that Sledgehammer had a lot of fans of COD on board, a lot of fans of COD 4 specifically. Advanced Warfare is a bit more of a positive interpretation of Western military, but it remains skeptical of war and the motives behind why wars are started. In Advanced Warfare, however, Sledgehammer is telling us to pay a bit closer attention to business owners rather than presidents. Little did they know. The funny thing is, even though I am overly positive about Advanced Warfare as a Call of Duty game, I don't think it is remembered as fondly as some of the others. Most of that is going to be because of the exosuits, or because of the advanced movement that made its way into Call of Duty multiplayer. There are 3 different instances of advanced 3-dimensional movement in Call of Duty games from this point on. Advanced Warfare's iteration might be my least favorite. Unfortunately, the sort of herky-jerky back and forth of a gunfight in AW does not lend itself to being enjoyable on a console, and the randomness of movement led to a randomness of engagements. Positioning, map knowledge, and even gun skill to a degree all were invalidated when someone could leap in the air, slide, air dash, or ground pound at any moment. I never loved the ways the gunfights felt in AW. I thought each time I would emerge victorious that I only did so as a result of me lucking into the right order of analog stick mashing. It felt like a goalkeeper against a penalty kick, like one had to make up their mind which way to fly before the engagement even kicked off fully. Hopefully you choose the right direction, and hopefully they choose the one that's advantageous for you. Overall, AW's multiplayer mode is solidly average to me, with some highlights being the uplink game mode as well as maps like Solar. The balance of this game was also completely out of whack, and maybe even most disastrously, gave way to a loot box system of tiered loot that would go on to dramatically corrupt the way Activision chooses to monetize these games. Advanced Warfare's co-op mode, Exo-Zombies, is another endearingly derivative attempt at renewing and refocusing a classic Call of Duty game mode. I played all the co-op modes for all of these games, and all the DLC and everything. While Treyarch's Zombies, particularly Black Ops 1, reigns far supreme in my book, Sledgehammer's attempt here deserves recognition. Exo-Zombies is an interesting enough take on the formula that has you being able to survive with a bit more empowerment this time due to the ability to harness the power of the exosuit. As a result, Exo-Zombies felt far more condensed and empowering than the deliberate setting up and careful planning necessary in a Treyarch title. I could get further into Exo-Zombies despite being bad at zombies as a whole, because I could often double jump my way out of sticky situations. I liked that in the co-op mode, and it was a refreshing twist. Funnily enough, Advanced Warfare will be known in my head going forward as exactly that, refreshing. Despite being what I call, with all good intentions, Call of Duty fanfiction, I believe that AW is one of the better Call of Duties to come out of this weird middle period of the franchise. The lack of nihilistic brutality and milquetoast stances make me appreciate this title even more when I play all these games in a row. It would be such a shame, for the series to immediately pivot back to that nihilism and sophomoric edginess. Call of Duty Black Ops 3 was finally the game that made me want this video to be over. I'm not even totally sure if it's a bad Call of Duty campaign. After playing it, I'm not even sure what to make of it at all. Much like a certain conservative writer for the Daily Wire, it confuses talking fast and incomprehensibly with intelligent commentary. Black Ops 3 is when I started to say to myself, do the plots of these games even really matter anymore? No, really, that isn't hyperbole. Do they? Do Call of Duty games in 2016 need a linear plot with characters and stories and lore and twists and turns? Because I'm not totally convinced they do, especially after playing this game. Take games like the more recent Battlefield 1 with its vignette-style single-player that has you put into different, non-connected stories of soldiers and heroes throughout war doing things that, even in a war-fetishistic game like Battlefield, probably didn't happen the way the stories are being told. No, this is explicitly the point of some of those war vignettes in BF1 single-player. They are exaggerated, absurd recollections of the battles that went on. It allows for the hilarity and nonsensical nature of a blockbuster single-player to play out without destroying the history of a very real war. Black Ops 3 is so chaotic in its presentation, so incapable of making sense, that it actually gives you the ability to play the missions in whatever order you see fit. That isn't a joke. Black Ops 3 forgoes linearity for a single-player experience as disjointed and discombobulated as the characters on display in the game. I can confidently say I didn't really like Black Ops 3's single-player mode. I wish they had done it differently. It is the full progression of what I've been saying over and over about these Treyarch games. They are wholly unconcerned with any sort of formal, interesting, or even comprehensible story structure, and instead confuse narrative novelty with the storytelling equivalent of an acid-induced fever dream. I mean, can you tell I've never actually dropped acid? But even that isn't my biggest issue with replaying Black Ops 3. My biggest issue with Black Ops 3 single player, important to note given that this game has one of the best multiplayer and zombies experiences on offer, is that it set back Call of Duty storytelling and campaign design quite a bit under the guise of moving it forward in progressive new directions. When compared to the ways in which Advanced Warfare created a re-emergence of Call of Duty games that mean something, I soon found that Black Ops 3 takes Call of Duty back to the sort of edgy, pulpy schlock that characterized the whole middle area between MW2 and Ghosts. Look, do I blame Black Ops 3 for contributing to a lot of the lack of faith in Call of Duty that we see universally today? Actually, a little bit yes. It did so in a number of ways. The first being it continued the further descent into madness that was Call of Duty's fascination with futurism. Look, a lot has been said about the whole 3-year or so conflict that surrounded Call of Duty and its advanced movement. Bring back boots on the ground was a rally cry for hundreds of thousands for years upon seeing Call of Duty transition toward the future and toward more and more mobility. This is a whole other conversation, one we will have soon, but it is important to note that a divide was beginning to form in terms of Call of Duty fans. Secondly, Black Ops 3 goes against the grain in its own borderline embarrassing way by dealing with a lot of the same themes and motifs of the previous game, but immediately turning them as edgy and dark as possible. I'm going to read for you the official marketing text used to encourage people to want to purchase this product. Call of Duty Black Ops 3 deploys players into a dark, twisted future where a new breed of Black Ops soldiers emerges and the lines are blurred between our own humanity and the technology we created to stay ahead. In a world where cutting-edge military robotics define warfare. With 3 unique game modes, campaign, multiplayer, and zombies, providing fans with the deepest and most ambitious Call of Duty ever. It's funny. One of my biggest criticisms of the later Treyarch games was so far in how they insist on dehumanizing the experience of war, showcasing conflict as brutally violent exercises in nihilism more so than brave, sacrificial, or even human. With Black Ops 3, they literally go on to dehumanize conflict by using discount brand Inception-level twists of transhumanism confusion. One thing that I do think deserves recognition is that there is this motif between all of the advanced movement games of arms or limbs being dismembered, and arms being in some way representative of remaining humanity in a transhumanistic future. It happens in Advanced Warfare, and it happens here. Limbs seem representative of something, of autonomy. I'm not saying that Black Ops 3 doesn't have interesting concepts. I'm saying that they refuse to do anything else with them. It is a frustrating side effect of playing all of these games in a row, and an even more frustrating side effect, I'm sure, in developing them year after year. To say that Black Ops 3 is scratching the bottom of the proverbial barrel of creativity would actually be an insult to the men and women who work on these games, even if it does sound like the easy criticism of the story. The reality is, Call of Duty is, at this point in its franchise history, more of a commodity than it ever has been. It may not be selling as well, but it absolutely is at its zenith in terms of being sold as a product, as a yearly service. At this point, Call of Duty is more related to Amazon Prime than it is something like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is what I compared it to during the Modern Warfare years. It is a yearly trip to the digital or physical stores in which you re-up your subscription, your guns and your maps, your new mechanics and stories. Call of Duty, for better or for worse, is a yearly $60 subscription service at this point in its history. Look at the way it includes the sort of dopamine-releasing leveling systems and unlocks for multiplayer in both zombies and single-player. Single-player has become an extension of the wider Call of Duty factory, crafting expendable 20-minute forays that start with action and end with action, without much thought of the player's part. This is, unfortunately, most evident in its mission design, which has some of the worst presentation in the franchise's history, in a franchise that is almost entirely carried by its incredible history of excellent presentation. The voice acting, the motion capture, and the level design all suffers here, to an alarming degree upon playing the very first mission. It is a huge downgrade from the attention brought into Advanced Warfare. And when you compare those two games, what you're comparing is a workplace that has a fresh new face looking to impress versus a guy who has been working there for 30 years and has no desire to try any harder than he absolutely has to. Call of Duty's future is a future of absolute despondency. It is a depressing, uncharitable, and frankly bad faith interpretation of what a future looks like in the direction we are heading. Am I disagreeing with the thought that this dystopian theory crafting is impossible? Of course not. I just find myself frustrated at how poorly and dismissively the game goes without explaining why the world is this way, why transhumanism and robotics has created a world such as this, and how it relates to the story being told at all. This disconnection between the, and let's not sugarcoat this, overtly political and social commentary on display in this game's setting, and the non-committal story is shockingly disappointing. You will hear plenty of games writers talk about the dreaded ludonarrative dissonance in games, but Black Ops 3 wants to introduce you to a much, much more deadly concept. narrative dissonance. In Black Ops 3, it isn't enough to have humans be as impersonal and dehumanized as possible. No, they want to literally dehumanize conflict. My point is, Black Ops 3 is the final boss of the descending confusion of every Treyarch game so far, and its lasting legacy, to me at least, is that it might just be the very furthest the series ever gets from the original intent of the series' origins. That is why so many people felt the series begin to lose its way officially here. That is why Black Ops 3's campaign's artistic and thematic goals are so disappointing to me. Finally, I'm not totally convinced that this game didn't fully convince Treyarch to just do away with campaigns going forward in the future. And yeah, that bums me out a bit. I bought Black Ops 4. I mean, I enjoyed it, I guess. I still hate that they abandoned single player. But like I said at the beginning of this section, if they're going to do this, if they're going to do the bare minimum at telling a story that means anything past what is happening on screen at the very moment, why do it? Why spend the money? So yeah, I kind of blame Black Ops 3 a bit. Not totally, but I do. I blame them for not trying to create something interesting anymore. I blame them for giving up. Which is a real gosh darn shame because holy cow did they nail it in the other two game modes. Look, the amount of adept design and passionate world building on display in both the multiplayer and the zombies is almost unbelievable when compared to the overwhelming mediocrity of the game's single player. Let's start with multiplayer, which most notably added wall running and boost jumping to the formula, as well as a set of hero classes with their own forms of ultimates, all the while very much keeping in line with the strengths and consistencies of Black Ops 2. I think Treyarch probably knew that they had struck some sort of arcadey gold with Black Ops 2 multiplayer, and while loving that, I think they did right by upping a lot of the intensity and mechanical complexity in this mode. The addition of the specialists do little to change the complexity or metagame of a match, more so just giving a player a kill streak on a cooldown. I do think these are overtuned a bit in the game, although I don't find it game-breaking. The 3-lane maps return here in full force to my happiness and I'm certain other players' disappointment. What I am left with when playing Black Ops 3 multiplayer is a relatively consistent experience, a consistency I just cannot find with the high time to kill, messy map design, and opaque color palettes of an Infinity Ward title. My favorite maps are Fringe and Stronghold. And if it isn't clear as far as multiplayer goes, I am fully Team Treyarch. But let's talk about the real star of Black Ops 3 here for a second. And look, I'm not going to say this lightly, and you know that I especially mean it because even still, I am not so big on the mode. Black Ops 3 Zombies is one of the most impressive things put into a Call of Duty game, and I've played them all, you see. I am stunned at the content offered on display here, and the level of excellence in art design and level design that is basically every single one of these maps. There is some absolutely insanely good game design going on in the Black Ops 3 Zombies maps, especially in maps like Shadows of Evil and Der Eisendrache. There's something genuinely special about being able to play these maps for the first time, exploring them as entirely new content and not knowing what is around each corner. No hyperbole, it reminds me of the first time I explored Yharnam or the Undead Burg for the first time in a Souls game. There's a prevailing fear of total annihilation that is always in the forefront of your head, but instead of the fear causing you to turn and run backward, it encourages you to run away forward, toward new ground. I think that this is a mark of an excellent game, and this isn't even to say the insane amount of story content that, if we're being totally honest here, is about outside the scope of what I hope to accomplish in this video. There are so many steps and buildables and Easter eggs and secrets that I can't even confidently say how much content is in these zombie maps because I just don't know. My first time playing these maps is always a real treat for the folks watching my stream because my face goes through so many different expressions of disbelief, excitement, horror, confusion, anger, and pure joy in such a little amount of time. Do I have any gosh darn clue why at the start of Gorod Krovi, our heroes were falling out of a portal from the sky, passing by a dragon on the way down, and landing next to a war-torn Stalingrad? Do I have any idea why there are two of the Russian dudes down there and one has a mech warrior suit? Do I need to? I almost felt like it was more fun this way. I'd be happy to explore the stories and do the Easter eggs, but there is something so joyously juvenile about not having any earthly clue what is around the corner. I would say that the only time it works against zombies is in the case of the map Revelations, in which the storyline content seems to take such precedence on the flow and rhythms of the gameplay that it starts to interfere with just the normal zombies gameplay systems. Revelations felt more like a nostalgia-fueled self-congratulation than it did any interesting zombies map, and while it mechanically works, I guess, I never felt like it developed its own identity in the ways that maps like Gorod Krovi or Der Eisendrache do. By the way, I have no earthly idea on how to pronounce those maps' names, clearly. I'm honestly just trying my best out here. The switching round music of Shadows of Evil, the grotesque and gothic art of Der Eisen, the reimagined maps of the original games, the absolute mind-blowing absurdity of Revelations, all contribute to one of the most consistently excellent content offerings available in the whole franchise. As a non-zombies fan, this made me a zombies fan. One day, maybe sometime in the channel's future, I'll do a video just about the zombies maps, Easter eggs and stories and all. And if you've made it this far in the video and think that sounds kind of interesting, let me know in the comments. Black Ops 3 Zombies, while a little complicated and sometimes difficult for my puny peanut brain, might just be the most impressive piece of content I will cover in this entire video. They really freaking nailed it here, and I am the first to admit I did not have the time to even scratch the surface of what is on offering. Maybe later. Remember when we mentioned in the last game the conflict surrounding Call of Duty fans and their desire to return to boots on the ground? It reached its zenith on that fateful day when Call of Duty Infinite Warfare was announced to the public. Look, I think a lot of us now in 2020 can comfortably say that this response was a bit overblown. It was a frustrated cry of impatience more than anything else, one that I can empathize with a bit. Call of Duty, for a lot of people, had lost its way. Call of Duty, for a lot of people, meant something to people. It was a decade-long after-school or work routine. Longtime Call of Duty fans felt a connection to the series. They felt involved in some way, and that involvement encouraged participation, like fans of the series should have some sort of say. As we saw with the release trailer for Infinite Warfare, the fans of Call of Duty felt thoroughly unheard. I don't think I have much stellar, piping hot commentary about what this is supposed to mean other than the pretty tepid take of, yeah, I mean, I get it, but ultimately artists should be able to make what they want despite what their fans are demanding. Which is funny because a big reason for the inclusion of advanced movement and future tech was an overwhelming clamoring from Call of Duty fans to reinvent itself and avoid derivative mediocrity. In that sense, I feel for the developers as well. A Call of Duty game takes around 2 to 3 years to make, and when the culture and public opinion around what is good or bad in a Call of Duty game can change so radically in those 2 to 3 years, I can't help but feel like the developers are fighting an uphill battle. It is amazing how during this detour in Call of Duty's mechanics, so many fans were begging for the return to old Call of Duty. I get it, and I don't mean to insinuate that COD fans don't know what they really want, but I do want to argue that for a bit that the single players in both Infinite Warfare and Advanced Warfare are as reminiscent and derivative of classic Call of Duty than any other campaign since Modern Warfare. So what do they even do? They can try and create a game that is mechanically separated enough from its predecessors, but still rings true a lot of the thematic objectives people have come to expect from a Call of Duty title. Well, that's exactly what Infinite Warfare does, and it ends up being one of my favorite Call of Duty campaigns to be released yet. In what might just be the most mechanically and chronologically distant Call of Duty game from the first Call of Duty game, Infinite Warfare still wants to be considered a classic Call of Duty game. Its official marketing says, Call of Duty Infinite Warfare returns to the roots of the franchise with large-scale war and a focus on cinematic, immersive, military storytelling. As I'm sure this quote probably drove thousands of angry gamers crazy, they kind of aren't wrong with this assessment of their game. Advanced Warfare was a deliberately anti-private military morality tale, and while it was straightforward and heavy-handed, it was earnestly interested in showing a favor for the militaries of countries and the people who served in those militaries. Infinite Warfare has a similar affection for the military in its narrative, although less focused on the geopolitics as much as it is focused on the bravery and valor of men and women fighting in the military. So if we understand Advanced Warfare to be the spiritual, thematic, and artistic sequel to Modern Warfare, then in a lot of ways Infinite Warfare is absolutely the sequel to Call of Duty the first. I know, it has a charming admiration for bravery, an undeniably naive but lovable appreciation for the strong man who puts the safeties of others ahead of himself. It has large-scale battles that encourage the sort of jaw-dropping recognition of combined military effort toward a common goal. It is so fun to see how the game shoe in some of the same mission structures in this game that were present in the first, like storming the Reichstag and clearing trenches. There's a clear attempt here at modeling the mission structure off what a classic COD game would look like, and I really appreciate it for that. But the game isn't trying to recreate the first Call of Duty game. It still comes chock full of a lot of new additions that are actually good. They're actually good additions that don't exist for the back-of-the-box marketing, but for the actual betterment of the game. Fleshed out side content that is better than a majority of the missions in their most recent attempt, Ghosts, makes this game immediately stand out ahead of the most recent campaigns. It has a hub world, a set of side activities, flight missions, loads of new tech, space combat, and loadout systems designed for single player, not just ripped for multiplayer. COD games in the past have come out and tried and failed to change up the single-player formula, with the only real success to this point being the modularity of Black Ops 2's plot. Infinite Warfare makes genuine attempts at being a quality video game, not just a serviceable mode in a Call of Duty game. So much so that I think if this game came out as its own single-player experience, separated from the rest of the franchise, it would be considered an excellent cult classic for those who actually played it. I mean, yeah, I'm actually that positive about the game. I don't even know if I love the sort of uncritical, fantastical adoration that the game gives the military, but I can appreciate its attempt at implicitly arguing that heroism and bravery are inherent to humans, regardless of nationality or race. In Infinite Warfare, your enemies are the hilariously evil Settlement Defense Front, a group of militaristic conquerors insisting on the hatred of Earth dwellers. Led by Jon Snow, these enemies are evil. Like, not just bad, they're evil. And guess what? Earth has to stand up to them. Not America, not Europe, the combined forces of Earth. There's this implication baked into the very core of this story that morality is not of a country or a set of ethics, but of a commonality between good people everywhere. That bravery and valor isn't something independent of the greatest generation, but instead true of people across history. It is saying that the call of duty will be answered across human history regardless. If there are bad doers, there will always be good doers in opposition, and their strength is in their combined forces. It is unapologetically affectionate of the military, but it is far more charming and convincing than the depressing nihilism that characterizes a game like Black Ops 3, which has practically nothing to say about the Call of Duty itself. If anything, I'm learning I am a sucker for these kinds of stories because I am a sucker for the classic games I grew up on. I didn't give this game a good enough shot. I, like many other gamers, chose to be disinterested in this game because, well, everyone else was. Here's a fun fact for you. I have bought every single Call of Duty game on release except for two of them. The first one, Call of Duty, which my brother and I bought a week or so after seeing it played at a friend's house in 2003, and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, which I got on sale about 6 months after release. Every other game I have purchased the very day it releases. Little did I know I was missing out on what was an excellent campaign experience, definitely one of the best the franchise has to offer. If you are like me and intentionally avoided this game, go give it a shot if you can get it on sale. It is hard for me to say the same about the multiplayer, which shares a lot of the similarities, at least mechanically, with Black Ops 3. I guess my most distracting problem with Infinite Warfare's multiplayer might just be the reason it got so much hatred from the internet. The setting takes away from a lot of the identity and recognizable elements from its weaponry. Each weapon acts, shoots, and looks like the exact same to me. They all pew-pew like a gun really shouldn't pew, and there's no easy way to tell what is a shotgun, what is a sniper, what is an SMG, or what is an assault rifle. It's a confusing mess of futuristic fiction that really did not resonate with me. The zombies mode, however, in this game is also an interesting departure from all of the previous attempts at zombies in this franchise, and it is one that doesn't take itself seriously at all. It's much better for it as well, with zombies in Spaceland being one of my favorite zombies experiences to date. I'm not sure how the wider zombies community feels about these maps, or if they hold up in terms of gameplay or mechanics, but I absolutely loved the departure from self-serious storylines and long-time eternity wars and multiple universes nonsense. This zombies experience was probably the most fun I've had with a zombies experience so far. Overall, Infinite Warfare is a really, really great Call of Duty story. It captures a lot of the valor and heroism that the series built itself on. So in that sense, I guess I can't recommend it enough. It's funny, Call of Duty World War II wants in every single way to be a classic Call of Duty game, like Infinite Warfare. It wants to be about big, capital letter themes. It wants to be about valor, about bravery and sacrifice. It wants to be about soldiers, not the player. In its own adorable Sledgehammer way, it wants to be one of the big boys. It wants to be emotional and thought-provoking, philosophical and debatable. It wants to be that same observational booth we talked about oh so long ago, and carry with it an edifying and emotional set of characters and circumstances that introduce a whole new set of players to the events of the Second World War. It tries really, really hard. Does it make it to the same heights of the Call of Duty games it tries to celebrate? Well, it does, but it does so falling forward through the mud. The strength of the story comes from its attention to showing the tried and true moments of the liberation of France through a beautiful presentation that only video games can provide. It nears the uncanny valley frequently, but this is the best that Normandy has ever looked in my long video game life. I recently went to Normandy, like myself. I've seen the monuments in the museums. I've learned about the sacrifice. I've shot the guns and been in the bunkers. It is hard to represent this struggle in real life. You want to respect the violence, but not make it gratuitous. You want to be honest about the bloodshed, but not give people an experience they won't enjoy. You want to make the landing intense, but you don't want someone to actually go through the pain and horror of that beach landing. So all you can do is your best to create an immersive experience that doesn't overstay its welcome and emphasizes the bravery of the soldiers involved. Sledgehammer nails this in a lot of ways by highlighting the fear the soldiers were feeling en route to Omaha Beach, but also makes sure to highlight the moments where the men choose to move forward despite that fear. It is gory, it is violent, and it is horrifying to a degree, but it moves quickly enough that it doesn't relish in the ferocity. Much like the men on the beach that day, it decides pretty early on that the main objective for itself is to get up the beach and start making it safe for the Allies. This is about all you can ask for in a video game about June 6, 1944. I have never seen anything like this, and when I remember back to the days of where I was playing Medal of Honor, this is how I remember the beach landing looking like. After the landing, you basically get a who's who of 1944 and 45 with a great deal of observational booth viewing pleasures. It is a stunning wartime presentation. The smoke and the mud envelops the experience in a non-trivial way, making vision tough on the player and movement confusing. Oftentimes I would see teammates bursting through a door or through smoke and almost lay on the trigger, only to recognize the uniform just in time to not blow away my squad mate. I did like this about the artistic mannerisms of the game. It contributed to its themes of chaos and war being thoroughly unenjoyable, and not at all a heroic thing on its own. Unfortunately, however, the game chooses to undermine itself and these thematic objectives frequently by adding in dreadfully video gamey elements such as heroic actions completed, in which the game gives you opportunities to complete heroic actions mid-mission, like saving a fellow squad mate or sparing a German POW, for a reward of action points toward using cheats like a wall hack. So of course, in David OZ way, I made it my absolute goal to never complete any of those. I shot every German prisoner, ignored every squad mate, and was consistently told that I completed no heroic objectives each mission, even after single-handedly taking down an armored train carrying V2 rockets. It is a hilariously ignorant way of describing the very thing that the game seems to want to venerate, which is to say that the game is saying that ordinary people are heroes for even fighting this war in the first place. Despite this, it does carry a candidate for best Call of Duty mission in the whole franchise, wherein you take the place of a French resistance member infiltrating a Nazi stronghold in Paris, France. If we are using the 4 pillars of a good COD mission, this one hits all of them, with a great amount of atmosphere on the side. COD has never really done this before, right? Putting you so close to the enemy like this. It is a strategic move to better emphasize a lot of the themes that the game admittedly forces into the game quite frequently. Teammates will often ask all the time, "Hey, they're people too, right?" And then someone will always respond with, "Nah, man, they're Krauts, kill them all." They obviously want the player to think what almost all people think when consuming World War II media. Were these men being killed, these Germans, standing in front of our heroic soldiers, monsters or men? Were they just following orders, or were they all irredeemable people? I have no interest in having this conversation, but I do think that World War II insists on saying that they are indeed humans who need to be judged as humans by human standards, in which they overwhelmingly fail the judgment, by the way. It is a cool peek behind the curtain that feels responsible and reasonable. It isn't a caricature of the Nazis because they do that bad enough themselves. They do a good enough job of making themselves out to be monsters just based on the knowledge we have about them already. World War II as a game does well to acknowledge this, and the mission sets itself apart from the rest of the series in a really special way. Still though, COD World War II remains as a very beautiful, absurdly well-produced example of the very surface interpretation of a Call of Duty game. It has everything you want from a World War II Call of Duty game. But I guess that's really it. In that sense, when you look at a title like World War II, it is a bit of a straightforward title, is it not? It would be kind of like me titling a video like this a retrospective and analysis of the Call of Duty franchise. I mean, it's not wrong, I guess, but it doesn't exactly carry the same sort of subversive potency that modern warfare did. That is ultimately the lasting legacy of World War II for me, a game that is straightforwardly honest in its presentation, lending the title to be one of the least interesting in the series' history, but most beautiful. The Zombies mode, however, insists on changing things up. Not only does it tonally shift away from both the Treyarch mode and the Infinity Ward mode, it also mechanically changes the mode by giving the players more of a laundry list of objectives, rather than telling the player to get in there and just survive. I appreciate this about the Zombies mode here, and while I think the scary and gritty approach to zombies kind of falls flat, mainly due to the hilarious voice acting of the zombies, I really had a great time playing through these Zombies maps. I gotta go through and actually complete a set of objectives and Easter eggs in these maps, whereas I was never able to do that on my own on the other maps. I don't mind getting babied when I rarely played these maps to begin with, and I appreciated the slower pace and easier structure. If they ever decide to make a full-on zombies game, with a story and a narrative, I think that Sledgehammer should look to design it. COD World War II is the closest multiplayer to Black Ops 2 in mechanical design than any other non-Treyarch multiplayer game. Its movement and hit detection, alongside with its longer than usual time to kill, creates an experience that is evocative of Black Ops 2 multiplayer, but struggles to find the same footing because of the lack of similarly excellent maps. I think that COD World War II multiplayer is decent, if not uninspired. And while I played it quite a bit on release, I remember this one falling from my consciousness quite a bit faster than the others. Apparently, the suits at Activision saw some data on the players and their relationships to each mode, because the next Call of Duty game would not include a single player. Look, Black Ops 4 has sort of forced my hand here, no? I write videos about themes and narratives, about statements the games are making about culture and politics. Where is my role in talking about a game like Black Ops 4? I don't even have a lot of commentary about the mechanical successes and failures of the multiplayer. It honestly feels like a Plan B attempt on the multiplayer mode. The whole game feels that way, now that I think about it. Like Treyarch was gonna do something different, and found out too late that it wouldn't work, so they took the engine, characters, and design of the previous game and hastily put it together in time for a release. The multiplayer plays off all of the nostalgia for Treyarch multiplayer by remastered versions of weapons and guns, and carries the same movement and shooting mechanics of the game that came out just 3 years earlier, minus the jetpacks. I don't like this game. I even played it a lot, and I still don't like it. It was another attempt at making Call of Duty closer to Amazon Prime or something like Madden, rather than a product with anything meaningful to say. I love Call of Duty. I love Call of Duty single player. I even thought the zombies mode was average and the multiplayer mediocre. This game has very little for a guy like me to speak about, unfortunately. So here is my analysis of Call of Duty Black Ops 4. Call of Duty Black Ops 4 is a first-person shooter game developed by Treyarch Games and released on October 12, 2018. A lot has been said about this game so far. A lot needs to be said about this game. Funnily enough, not a lot is said in this game. I'm not the first person to note how Call of Duty Modern Warfare struggles to find its position on the very politics it wishes to examine. Plenty of people have rightfully criticized the game for doing any number of irresponsible things with its setting, such as blaming the Russians in the game for doing an action that the United States actually did in actual real life. A lot has been said about how the game chooses to create fictional Middle Eastern countries and towns as a politically correct stand-in for Syria, the real-life location the game is transparently modeling off of, all the while having no problem using cities like London. A lot has been said about how a core moment in the game has the enemy using chemical warfare, and how the story, mechanics, and characters of the game treat this as an abhorrent choice, even for war. The game has you call in white phosphorus on its first mission, with no commentary whatsoever. It's also a kill streak in the multiplayer. A lot continues to be said about how Infinity Ward refuses to acknowledge the fact that their game is in any way political, despite every single mission having a real-world inspiration that can be tracked to the last 20 years of US-led foreign intervention. Despite the fact that this is about counterterrorism, about what is right and what is wrong in warfare, about the cause and effect of intervention in the Middle East. Does Infinity Ward need to be clowned on for being so non-committal and historically revisionist almost a year after release for these events in their single player? Yeah, absolutely they do. A lot has been said, but I'm not using that as an excuse to not make it abundantly clear to you how immature the developers of Modern Warfare think you, the player, are. It is such a gross misunderstanding and infantile manipulation of consumers' intelligence to even consider the fact that this game is not political. Albeit, I understand completely. Making your games political has just become a dog whistle code for people to use when they are afraid a game has some sort of agenda in its themes or stories. It is a preposterous thing to be feared, but gamers everywhere are mighty concerned with the idea of people inserting their own personal opinions and ideologies into their art, despite it happening for as long as creativity has existed. Modern Warfare positions itself in every single which way in terms of being a serious, artful, meaningful game about lowercase modern warfare. It wants to be as close to real as possible. It has a fetishistic relationship to its weaponry, to the intimacy of battle, to the smoke and muck and blood of a real counterinsurgency. It wants all of that, without any of the baggage of being taken seriously as media. Most of you watching this insist on video games being art. Most of you would argue against the crotchety stance of saying they are not. I certainly know they are art. Call of Duty Modern Warfare is a great time for video game players everywhere to start walking it and talking it, and finally acknowledge that with great art comes great responsibility, and this game needs to be called out. I cannot stress enough how important it is to not fall under the trap of believing them when they say this game is not political, and as bad as that is, it is just a line in an interview I am being critical of. So let's look at the game itself, the text, and not even the litany of problems I mentioned earlier. The team at Infinity Ward likes to use this phrase, ripped from the headlines, quite a lot when talking about this game. Like in an interview with The Verge, they mention how they want to create experiences that are near indistinguishable from real-world events, but not tied to them completely so as to be flexible and inoffensive. Okay, fine, I get. Wait, but not fine. Not fine at all. Holy crap, not fine. Not even close to fine. Not only does this game cite real-world places and events and conflicts that really happened, and not only do they freely attribute war crimes committed by the US to other countries in the story, but they are ignoring the fact that slapping different proper nouns on things is not at all making your story apolitical or inoffensive. It does not take a rocket science to attribute real-world countries and ideas to each and every single event in this game. Political allegory is, yes, still political, But god dang, is this not even political allegory? Frankly, this is just propaganda. Not only does it explicitly lie to you, it wants you to think things it doesn't even believe. I cannot stand the way in which this game thinks it is doing something. I cringe when I imagine the boardroom meetings going over the story of this game. We want to tell a story of gray areas, of the amorphous blob in the middle of right and wrong. We want to get players thinking. There's nothing more embarrassing to me than when a game oversteps its boundaries into thinking it is smarter than it actually is in reality. Were you frustrated with the heavy-handedness that went into The Last of Us 2's messaging about revenge and the cyclical nature of violence? Then you should be frustrated with this game's inability to achieve subtlety about amorality embedded into 21st century conflicts. They want to show complex situations, but don't tell you what you should believe. That's why it isn't political. We're not forcing ideas down your throat. They say this a lot, that warfare is immoral in modern warfare, that the truth hides somewhere between the binaries, that the real world lies somewhere in the middle of the prism. They want to have you experience modern warfare, as it is, without any filter to sway you either way. Do you see how absurd this is? Do you see how a franchise called Call of Duty, Western developed, where you play as one side throughout the entire game, where you fulfill objectives they design and which you have no choice but to carry out? Do you see how it's impossible to be in this gray area? Modern Warfare wants so desperately to be intellectually pure, so central in its presentation, that it either straight up lies or just fails to realize that anything made by humans cannot be an objective understanding of the world. Modern Warfare, by virtue of its interactivity, wants you to do certain things, kill certain people, not kill other certain people, and fulfill certain objectives for very real political goals. Shout out Jacob Geller in his video titled, "Does Call of Duty Believe in Anything?", in which he mentions how you can shoot the baby in the terrorist hideout, but you cannot shoot Captain Price. This is not intellectually pure. This is not center. Modern Warfare, by virtue of its ineptitude, wants you to believe it is just showing you the facts. You make up your own mind. They will show you a lot of torture in this game. I mean, a lot of torture. With little filtering of the content, Modern Warfare wants you to sit up close and personal and feel the depravity of actions levied against you and the people around you. Does practically torture porn sound like an amoral presentation to you? Do I get to show people, undeserving people, getting brutally waterboarded and say, oh well, that's just the old moral gray area right there. Man, what to make of this situation? Who knows? Certainly not us. Sorry, Modern Warfare. You don't get to claim you are showing the realities of Modern Warfare for me to interpret, then say your game is not political. You can't have both. So why am I throwing a fit about this game and not the others? Well, partly because I'm a human and the arrogant smugness and smarm they present this game with drives me up a freaking wall, and I wanted to dunk on them a bit, but also because this is a soft reboot of a game that did exactly what this game wants to do, but actually succeeded. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare was a game about modern warfare through and through. We spoke about it in length, but it's true. It has positions and aspirations and objectives, and a theme and a message. It is its skirting responsibility under the guise of apolitical purity. It expresses the uncomfortability and amorality of modern warfare through its mechanics. It shows the effects and consequences of the very imperialism it wishes to critique in its story. It is a political game, just like this one. It just isn't so afraid of reactionary gamers that it won't admit it. Call of Duty 4 and Call of Duty Modern Warfare both have this theme, this ethos of, well, if the ends justify the means, then so be it. In COD 4, the ends justified by the means was nuclear hellfire, and decades of intervention invoked pain. In Modern Warfare, I'm not sure what the end was supposed to be. I guess that the good guys win out by whatever means necessary. The good guys. Good. Either there are no ends in sight for Modern Warfare's means, or they just made a moral judgment in their game dedicated to amoral presentation. Try and make some damn sense, Infinity Ward. How has Call of Duty, a game series about war and valor, about celebrating heroism, understanding sacrifice, and observing history, become so positionless so as to not even admit that their game has a position? That is my beef with this game. It betrays everything I have talked about positively in the last couple of hours. Call of Duty was never exactly the paragon of moral righteousness and mature storytelling, but it had identity. It had authorial intent. It had a character that could make you say, oh, that game is Modern Warfare 2, or, oh, that one's Black Ops 1, immediately. You could always tell. Every Call of Duty game is not the same. They are similar in mechanics and presentation only. Each carried individual politics, character, themes, and motifs. If Activision continues to encourage this sort of apolitical milquetoast design in their COD games going forward, Call of Duty will actually begin to live up to their incorrect reputation of being the same thing every year. So, how do I feel about the game itself, as a product, as a Call of Duty game? I mean, it's incredibly technically impressive and absurdly beautiful. I think Captain Price looks really goofy, and I think the famous clean house mission isn't nearly as effective as it thinks it is, given the forced linearity of the mission. I think generally a lot of the concessions the game makes toward feeling more grounded and realistic just make the moment-to-moment gameplay a bit more choppy and obtuse. I enjoyed my time with Price and gang, however, and I would say that this campaign doesn't even come close to the level of terrible I thought campaigns like Black Ops 3 and Ghosts had. So yeah, despite the politics and all that stuff, it's kind of middle of the road for me mechanically. The multiplayer, however, is a bit more interesting to me given how divisive I think the opinion is about the game. I did my research on this one and found that there is a bit of a divide between the public match audience and the more competitive-minded audience, many of which are watching or competing in the newly franchised Call of Duty League. Call of Duty pros like Scump and Zero have been fined for saying it is the worst Call of Duty multiplayer ever. Whereas Reddit forums would have me believe this is one of the most enjoyable COD experiences to date. I bought MW the day it came out and played quite a bit. I found the game extremely boring extremely quickly, and was frustrated with the focus on realism despite each gun still shooting straighter full auto than a mounted sniper rifle. The maps are some of the worst I've played in a Call of Duty game, with some absolutely confounding spawn logic that still to this day refuses to make sense to me. I found most games came down to getting ground and holding angles on head glitches for the entirety of the game. If you were on the team that won the ground initially, good for you. You will have fun this game. If you're trying to get the ground back, prepare for an insufferable experience of checking 57 different possible head glitch spots on your way to the exit of your spawn. In every way possible, this game is the bits of COD I tend not to like. It is the least arcadey, the least movement focused, and the least competitive in terms of map design I have played yet. In its quest for realism, I believe it has foregone a lot of the enjoyable parts of an arcadey, arena-style Call of Duty game. My same reasons for disliking it might as well be yours for appreciating it. I guess I'm not sure. What I am certain of is this game has single-handedly returned Call of Duty to near the top of the gaming consciousness, with one fell swoop. Warzone. Warzone, a battle royale, has made Call of Duty cool again. I don't know how. I don't even know why. But it's true. People are playing Call of Duty again. They're playing like they did back in the day. After school, Warzone. After dinner, Warzone. 3 a.m., Warzone. I'm not even sure I like it that much, but when my 14-year-old cousin told me that he didn't want V-Bucks for his birthday this year and said he wanted COD points, I knew it was all over. Call of Duty was cool again. I think I'm a little too old now. Maybe my window is closed. But my heart grows 3 sizes thinking of a whole new generation hopping on after school every day to play some Modern Warfare. Brings a tear to my eye just thinking about it. Hey everyone, I want to thank you so much for watching the video. This was a long one, wasn't it? A lot of work went into this, a lot of time and energy. I really appreciate you sticking all the way through the end. Go ahead and tell me everything that you thought. I'm sure when I cover 18 games that some of those 18 games you guys are going to have opinions on, so let me know in the comments. I just usually like to end my videos with sort of like a state of the channel type of thing, just say hello to you guys. So today is a really big day for me in the channel for a lot of reasons. This is the biggest project I've ever done. Call of Duty means a lot to me. I've had it a lot. Look, I got the Advanced Warfare t-shirt. I don't know where I got this. And even better is the Modern Warfare 2 sweatpants. You see that? I've had these for like over a decade now, I think. I wear these all the time. So yeah, it's Call of Duty, for better or for worse, has been a hugely influential thing in my life, just like Borderlands was. And in a weird way, finishing this video and the Borderlands video is really special to me because it's like I'm, in my own way, giving back in a way to the franchises. But the point of all of this is that for the first time in a while, I don't exactly know where I'm going next with the channel. I mean, it's not a bad thing at all. I have a couple of ideas, but I don't have that one franchise that I've always wanted to cover. I don't have that one white whale of a video that I've always wanted to do. That was always kind of this Call of Duty video. And so it's going to be interesting for me to figure out where I want to go next, what kind of content I want to cover. If you like this kind of thing most, let me know. But if you like my other videos, like if you like the ones about travel, or if you like the ones about the sex and video games video, then maybe that would be good too for you guys to let me know, because chances are I'll probably do another one like this and then do another big analysis. So I wanted to talk about two more things real quick. The first one I just wanted to show off because, I mean, come on. The first one is, this is a gift that my wife gave me for Valentine's Day that I just thought you guys would find really interesting and kind of adorable. She actually just went out and printed the book of Rockstar Games. Because, like, I don't know. She's just so sweet. She went out, I guess she got my Google Docs. She made a little cover. I'm trying to make it. The Book of Rockstar Games. And she went out and just did it. And look, single spaced all the way through. This thing is so many pages. I mean, it is 77 pages. I think it's around 60,000 words. To put this into perspective, I think that I think this video is around 40,000. And so, you know, this is just really cool because it's a concrete, holdable evidence of what I did, and that I actually wrote like a significant amount about a bunch of Rockstar games. And I think that's really, really cool, and I love that. Second thing I want to talk about is just that the launch of my Patreon, what you can expect from the video, or what you can expect from the Patreon, and what I hope to do with it. So I've never really done a Patreon before. I don't really know much about it. I give to a couple creators, but I've never made one. So, you know, I'm going to be kind of learning as I go. But really all I want to do is just make it very clear that the Patreon is not like a store in which you can buy David OZ things. The Patreon is very explicitly just like for you to decide if you want to support me financially. I'm not going to give you like water bottles. I'm not going to give you t-shirts. I'm not going to give you anything. This Patreon is going to be, this is David OZ. You're going to get your name in the credits. You're going to support this person whose content hopefully you enjoy. And you're going to get director's commentaries on each video. So that's the one thing that I will include with it, is that I'll go over each video and I'll pause it every once in a while. I'll talk about the editing process. I'll talk about what went into what part. I'll go back and do it for all of my videos, talk about which things I don't like. I'll respond to comments that I've gotten. I'll go back, say, on my Red Dead video and say, you know, I really like this part, but I wish I would have done this differently. Or I've replayed this since and I kind of feel this way. And I'll do more unscripted content there. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, my thoughts behind my videos, if you're interested in talking to me personally, any of this kind of stuff, and if more importantly, if you feel comfortable giving, you know, however much money to my Patreon to support me financially, then do it. But otherwise, please consider supporting me in another way. Support by comment, by liking, by watching my videos. Do not give financially unless you are 1000% certain that it is comfortable for you to do so. And finally, I mean, I just want to learn, and if I come up with good ideas to include in the Patreon rewards, I will do. So the link is down below. I would really appreciate it if you at least took a look and let me know if it's something you're interested in supporting financially. So other than that, thank you so much for watching the video again. Oh my gosh, we're done. 18 games. I think it's 18, something like that. Oh, we did it, boys and girls. We did it.